Rick poisoning Morty's kidneys with actual organ failure, just to manipulate a dog into feeling guilty. Rick creating both Beths as clones, after accidentally killing the original daughter, and mind-wiping himself to avoid the guilt. Simple Rick's factory deliberately orchestrating worker rebellions to harvest the exact emotion of tasting freedom right before execution. And those are just 3 of the darkest Rick and Morty theories in this video. Can you imagine all the disturbing stuff there is to uncover when we dive deep into 2 hours of Rick and Morty lore to fall asleep to? But it's disturbing theories over the next 2 hours? I was certainly shocked by some of the stuff I found when I made this video. So if you're ready to be blown away by what's about to come, sit back, relax. Maybe don't get too attached to the idea that Rick's a good person. Spoiler, he's absolutely not. And let's begin. Lawnmower Dog, Episode 2 from Season 1, has everyone talking about the dog uprising like it's Planet of the Apes, Puppy Edition, but they're sleeping on the part where Rick straight up poisons Morty's kidneys and treats it like he's handing out Flintstones vitamins. This isn't some theoretical, you might die in the dream stuff Rick throws around when he needs Morty to take things seriously. Rick gives his 14-year-old grandson pills that cause actual organ failure, like real biological shutdown that would have you on a transplant list, and his explanation is basically chill, bro, it's for the plot. The whole mess starts because Jerry can't figure out how doors work. Snuffles pees on the carpet, honestly. Valid response to living with Jerry. And instead of accepting that he failed basic pet ownership 101, Jerry shoves the dog's face in the puddle while screaming at it. Peak Jerry energy right there, solving problems by making them worse and louder. Then Jerry has what he thinks is a galaxy brain moment. Force Rick to make the dog smarter so it understands bathroom etiquette. Rick warns him this is a terrible idea, using that exact "don't pull that thread" phrasing that means, I know how this horror movie ends, but Jerry threatens to ground Morty unless Rick helps. So Rick whips up an intelligence enhancement helmet in about 30 seconds, which should immediately raise some red flags. That's not genius scientist quickly solves a problem speed. That's, I have dog mind control technology just sitting in my garage next to the jumper cables, speed. Rick's got consciousness-altering devices on standby, the same way normal people have screwdrivers, which raises some questions about his weekend activities that probably don't have great answers. The helmet works exactly as well as Rick knew it would, which is to say it works like a Black Mirror episode that got rejected for being too dark. Snuffles goes from confused pet to self-aware being, having an existential crisis about testicle removal in the span of like 6 hours. He builds himself a robot body, full Iron Man suit situation, and starts asking Summer, "Where are my testicles?" Which is honestly the most legitimate question anyone asks in this entire series. He renames himself Snowball because his slave name doesn't reflect his pretty white fur, and you know what? Fair point, Snowball. Fair point. The dogs launch a full military coup faster than most people can organize a birthday party. We're talking complete societal collapse, Eastern Seaboard captured, humans getting muzzled on live television. A news reporter begs for her life, while 2 dogs casually debate whether she's saying, "I love lasagna," like they're discussing the weather, because apparently dogs interpret human terror as Garfield. References, which is somehow the least disturbing thing happening in this episode. Meanwhile, Morty's living in what he thinks is dream paradise. 2 naked women in bed, a robot dog butler bringing him drinks, basically every 14-year-old boy's fantasy except directed by someone who really understands luxury services. Morty has zero clue that his actual body is currently marinating in its own feces, while his grandfather plots biological warfare against his internal organs. This is where Rick shows up with a baseball bat. Violence is always Rick's hello, knocks out the butler, and explains the situation with the casual energy of someone describing their commute. They're inside Snowball's dream, Rick explains, and then he drops some knowledge about dream mechanics that he definitely shouldn't have memorized unless he moonlights as a dream assassin. Dreams move 1/100th the speed of reality. Dog time is 1/7 human time. So every day here is like a minute. Rick rattles this off like he's reading a grocery list, which means either he's naturally gifted at Dreamtime mathematics, unlikely, or he's been running Inception-style operations across multiple species and dimensions for years, extremely likely, and extremely concerning. Then Rick hands Morty some pills, and Morty, sweet summer child that he is, assumes they're meant to wake him up. Because that's what pills do in normal situations, with normal grandparents who aren't actively committing medical malpractice. Rick hits him with the truth. Close. It's gonna make your kidneys shut down. Not dream kidneys, real kidneys. Actual biological organs that Morty needs for activities like living and not being on dialysis. Morty goes, "What?" Understandable reaction to surprise organ failure. And Rick delivers his entire moral philosophy in one sentence. "It's necessary for the plan, Morty. Don't even trip, dog." That's Rick's ethics textbook right there. Poisoning children is totally cool, as long as it serves a purpose. And the purpose doesn't even need to be a good one. It just needs to be Rick's purpose, and suddenly everything else, including your grandson's kidney function, becomes acceptable collateral damage, like civilian casualties in a Michael Bay movie. Inside Snowball's dream, the manipulation plays out like a soap opera, written by someone who really hates humanity. Morty's dying on a medical table because his kidneys are actually failing in reality, making the dream one of those technically accurate nightmares. And Snowball's burning through his entire military conquest budget trying to save him. An accountant dog. And yes, of course the dogs have accountants. They built a functioning society in like 6 hours, while humanity can't even agree on pizza toppings. USA warns that these medical expenses are bankrupting the empire. Snowball drops the line that breaks everything. "To hell with my kingdom, bean counter. I would trade it all for my human's health and happiness," which is more genuine affection than Rick has shown Morty in the entire series. A dog who just learned what consciousness is yesterday cares more about Morty's well-being than Rick does, after presumably years of knowing him. The accountant asks, "Do you think they would have done this for us?" And Snowball has his big character growth moment, which is wild because he's been sentient for less than a day, and he's already doing more emotional work than Jerry's done in his entire life. Snowball realizes humans would absolutely not bankrupt themselves to save a dog. The episode literally shows a nature documentary explaining how humans selectively bred dogs into man's subservient little buddy, while Snowball watches his entire worldview collapse in real time like someone just told him Santa isn't real, except Santa is human decency. Snowball decides conquering Earth will only create more cruelty, so the dogs portal away to build a better society, one where pet insurance is mandatory, which is both adorable and a savage burn on American healthcare that probably went over most people's heads. Rick's plan works perfectly. Dogs leave, Earth saved. Morty never finds out his kidney failure was real. Rick explains the whole Dreamtime mathematics thing, but conveniently forgets to mention, "Oh yeah, by the way, I actually poisoned you. Your kidneys really did shut down." That part wasn't dream logic, that was medical malpractice. Rick just lets Morty think everything was fake except crapping his pants, which Rick confirms happened. Because apparently Rick needs Morty to know he slept in his own feces, but not that he experienced organ failure. Interesting priorities there. Rick. The entire dog uprising happened in 6 hours of real time. 6 hours that translated to what felt like a year in dog dream time, during which Rick also exposed Morty to permanent death via dream murder. Earlier that same night, Rick explicitly tells him, "If you get killed in someone else's dream, you die for real," which is just great safety information to drop mid-crisis. So in one evening, Rick risked Morty's life through dream death, then caused actual biological organ damage to manipulate a pet's emotions. Rick's having the kind of night that would give Child Protective Services a collective aneurysm, and he's treating it like a normal Tuesday. Here's the thing that makes this genuinely disturbing, rather than just dark comedy. Rick didn't need to do any of this. He could have talked to Snowball, who, as we learn, is actually pretty reasonable for someone who just discovered consciousness. Rick could have used literally any other plan. Rick himself suggested just abandoning Earth and setting up camp in a sewer tunnel, which would have solved everything without requiring child organ failure. But Rick chose poison because it was the most efficient route to emotional manipulation, and apparently efficiency beats basic human decency when you're the smartest man in the universe. Citation needed on that smartest claim, honestly. The final scene has Morty getting all sentimental about Snowball leaving, and Snowball responds with genuine affection, telling Morty he can call him Snuffles again. The dog learned about human cruelty, started a revolution, conquered the eastern seaboard, built a functioning military dictatorship, and still chose mercy. Still loved Morty enough to give him a kind goodbye. Meanwhile, Rick spent the night systematically poisoning that same kid, like he's working through a checklist of things that should definitely result in prison time, then acted like nothing happened. Rick has dream manipulation technology, inception technology, basically, intelligence enhancement devices, the kind of stuff that would make DARPA weep with joy, and interdimensional travel capabilities, which is just unfair for everyone else, and he uses all of it to poison children. The real horror isn't that dogs almost took over Earth in a Planet of the Apes speedrun. The horror is that Rick's problem-solving process went, Step 1, poison the 14-year-old, and nobody even blinked. And here's the kicker, nobody ever brings it up again. Morty never gets a follow-up kidney check. Rick never faces consequences. Shocking, I know. The episode ends with Jerry crying because the dog situation reminded him of Old Yeller. Jerry, buddy, you missed the point of that movie and also this entire situation. Completely oblivious to the fact that Grandpa committed felony child endangerment and everyone just moved on to the next adventure, like this is normal family bonding. Rick chose organ failure over having a conversation. He picked calculated biological harm over literally any other solution in the infinite multiverse. And the show treats this like it's just another wacky Rick adventure, instead of, this man should not be allowed near children, unsupervised. But hey, at least the dog got a happy ending, right? The bar is so low, it's basically underground at this point. Let's move right along to our next disturbing theory. Anatomy Park, episode 3 from season 1, shows Rick running a business that treats human bodies like real estate, and the disturbing part isn't that he's doing it. The disturbing part is how casual he is about replacing his vessels when they die. This isn't Rick having a wacky adventure inside someone. This is Rick beta testing a business model where living people become literal infrastructure for profit, and when one host dies, he just grabs another body and starts over like he's upgrading to a new iPhone. Rick brings home Ruben, who he describes as an old friend he checks in on once a year for a medical evaluation, which is code for making sure my human theme park is still operational. Jerry gets suspicious because Rick doing something nice doesn't track with literally anything anyone knows about Rick's personality. Rick brushes it off and takes Ruben to the garage, where the medical evaluation involves shrinking Morty down to microscopic size and injecting him into Ruben's body like he's downloading an antivirus program into a computer that's also a person. Morty lands inside Ruben and discovers Anatomy Park, Morty Baby, a full-functioning amusement park, complete with Pirates of the Pancreas, Rick's Baby, which he's very defensive about, Spleen Mountain, and Bladder Falls. Rick explains this is a little business venture I've been cooking up on the side with Dr. Bloom, an amusement park inside a human body. Science isn't cheap, Morty. This should really help put a dent in the overhead. Rick's treating human bodies like industrial real estate, except instead of building a strip mall, he's building theme park attractions inside someone's organs and charging admission. The whole operation runs on infrastructure built from human biology. The bone train runs through the skeletal system. The arterial transit system uses blood vessels as highways. The digestive tract becomes the evacuation route. Get it? Because it's where poop goes. Rick and Dr. Bloom have turned Ruben's entire biological system into a functioning business, with rides, restaurants, there's a Panda Express in the intestines, and safety protocols. They've got animatronic attractions, gift shops, and apparently enough staff that they need managers for the churro stand. When Morty asks about the scary conditions inside the liver, Rick explains, Ruben's seen some rough years. Morty, don't judge. You don't agree to have a theme park built inside you if your life's going great. That line does a lot of heavy lifting because it confirms Ruben consented to this arrangement, but also confirms Rick specifically targets vulnerable people who are desperate enough to let someone turn their body into a tourist attraction. Rick's business model is finding people at their lowest point and offering them what's basically a Faustian bargain. We'll give you money, or medical care, or whatever you need, and in exchange, we're gonna build Space Mountain in your pancreas. The park contains humanity's most noble and ferocious diseases as living museum exhibits. Hepatitis A, tuberculosis, gonorrhea, E. coli, and bubonic plague are all kept in containment like Jurassic Park, except the dinosaurs are sexually transmitted infections. When security shuts down, these diseases break loose and start killing the park staff, which raises the question, who approved keeping weaponized plague inside a living human as a tourist attraction? The answer is Rick, obviously, because Rick's relationship with ethics is like Jerry's relationship with success. Theoretically, they know each other, but they've never actually met. When Ruben's heart stops beating, Rick's response is, okay, well I can't cure death. This is bad, Morty. You're trapped in a dead man. No mourning for his old friend? No reflection on the fact that someone just died specifically because Rick was using them as biological infrastructure. Rick's immediate concern is the logistical problem of having employees trapped inside a corpse, which is an HR nightmare but apparently not a moral one. Then Rick gives Morty what might be the most Rick advice in the entire series. Listen, if the situation keeps darkening, do yourself a favor and hop by Pirates of the Pancreas. Obviously I'm biased, but I think it's great, Morty. It's a bunch of pirates running around a pancreas. We don't whitewash it either, Morty. The pirates are really rapey. Rick's employee is trapped inside a decaying corpse fleeing from deadly diseases, and Rick's using it as an opportunity to get Morty to visit his favorite ride. That's like if the Titanic was sinking and the captain kept announcing, "While you're evacuating, please consider dining at our award-winning restaurant." The episode's climax has Rick solving the "everyone's trapped in a corpse" problem by strapping dynamite to Ruben's body, kicking him into space, and using a growth ray to explode him into a giant naked corpse hovering over the continental United States. Rick turns his dead friend into the world's most horrifying fireworks display, showering blood and viscera across the entire country, and his reaction is basically, well, that worked. The news reports describe it as a giant naked sky Santa exploding, which is technically accurate but misses the part where Rick just committed what's arguably biological terrorism by spreading corpse chunks across America. The CDC probably had some questions that never got answered. But here's where the theory gets really disturbing. Rick immediately starts planning the replacement. When Annie says she studied Dr. Bloom's work and can create a new, much safer park, Rick asks the only question that matters to him. What about Pirates of the Pancreas? When Annie says it was underrated, Rick yells, "Booyah, hold your breath," and immediately shrinks her down to put her in a new host body. Rick doesn't mourn Dr. Bloom's death or reflect on whether building theme parks inside living people is ethical. He just starts production on Anatomy Park 2. This time it's personal, and also still inside someone. The post-credits scene confirms Rick already has the next victim lined up. Ethan Summers' boyfriend is lying on a table asking, "So those guys are inside me, huh? Like building a park?" Rick's already moved Annie and an entire construction crew into Ethan's body, and when they start suggesting changes to Pirates of the Pancreas, Rick loses it and hangs up on them. Rick cares more about his pancreas pirates than he does about the fact that he's using a teenager's body as commercial real estate without proper permits, or presumably any permits, because what zoning board approves theme park inside human organs? The episode reveals Rick's business model: find vulnerable people desperate enough to agree to this arrangement, build infrastructure inside their bodies, profit off tourists who want to see diseases and rides made from human organs, and when the host inevitably dies from the stress of having an amusement park inside them, immediately move operations to a new body and start over. It's like if Airbnb was inside people and also the rental properties kept dying. Rick's treating human bodies the same way corporations treat natural resources, HS, as things to be exploited for profit until they're used up, then move on to the next one. Ruben's body fails. Rick doesn't even pause before lining up Ethan as the replacement. Dr. Bloom dies. Rick immediately recruits Annie to continue the project. The business model requires a constant supply of human hosts, which means Rick needs to maintain a pipeline of desperate people willing to let him turn their internal organs into tourist attractions. The medical evaluation excuse Rick gives Jerry suggests he's been doing this for years, with Ruben checking in once a year implies this is annual maintenance, not a new arrangement. If Rick's been running Anatomy Park for years, and if the park has enough staff to need managers and security teams and food service workers, then Rick's employing dozens of microscopic people inside one guy's body. When that guy dies, all those employees either die with him or need to evacuate and find new employment inside whoever Rick kidnaps next. The infrastructure requirements alone are terrifying. The bone train needs track laid through skeletal systems. The haunted liver needs animatronic werewolves installed in organ tissue. Bladder Falls requires plumbing, actual working plumbing inside a human bladder, which raises questions about waste management that nobody wants answered. Rick built an entire functioning theme park with rides and restaurants and gift shops inside a living person, which means Ruben spent years walking around with tourists, riding roller coasters through his spleen. Rick's pitch to Dr. Bloom was presumably, "Hey, you know what would be profitable? Charging people admission to walk around inside someone's organs while diseases chase them." And Dr. Bloom, who's a scientist, not a monster, agreed to this plan and helped build it. That means Rick's convincing legitimate medical professionals that human body tourism is ethical as long as the safety protocols are good enough. Spoiler alert, the safety protocols were not good enough because everyone died except Morty and Annie, and Rick's response was, "Let's do it again, but safer this time." The episode treats this like a fun adventure with gross-out humor about intestines and poop jokes, but the actual content shows Rick systematically exploiting vulnerable people by turning their bodies into commercial ventures. When those bodies fail, Rick discards them and moves on to the next host without any reflection or consequences. Ruben dies, Rick explodes him over America, and by the end of the episode, Rick's already building Anatomy Park version 2 inside Ethan like nothing happened. Rick created a business model that requires a steady supply of human hosts who are desperate enough to agree to this arrangement. And when Jerry questions Rick's motives for helping someone, Rick's defensive reaction, "What kind of monster do you think I am? I'm sitting here trying to save the guy's life," is telling because Rick knows exactly what kind of monster he is. He's the kind who builds theme parks inside people, profits off their suffering, and when they die, finds a new body before the old one even gets cold. That's not friendship or charity, that's industrial-scale human exploitation with gift shops and churro stands. Now we're diving into another dark and twisted theory. If you're enjoying this, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The ending of a certain episode seems to offer comfort. Morty's violent rampage was caused by drugged candy bars, so he's still the same innocent kid we know. Except the final shot shows Rick throwing away a wrapper that reads, "Now purginol free," which means the candy bars never had the violence-amplifying drug in them. Rick completely made up the purginol excuse to cover up the disturbing truth. Morty's massacre was 100% genuine repressed rage, and Rick would rather lie about drugs than let Morty confront what he's actually capable of. Look Who's Purging Now, Episode 9 from Season 2, starts with Rick and Morty crash landing on a purge planet where one night a year, everyone murders each other consequence-free, like the movie The Purge, which Rick casually mentions he's seen similar setups on other planets called The Cleansing, The Red Time, or just Murder Night. They stop at a general store for wiper fluid, and the old shopkeeper gives them free candy bars with an ominous warning that he's a nice guy. For now, which should have been everyone's first clue that accepting free candy from someone about to start purging is questionable at best. Morty initially refuses to participate in any violence. When Rick wants to watch the purge through their windshield, Morty's horrified at the idea of people killing each other for entertainment. Rick tries to get him to admit he'd click on a decapitation video if one was online, and Morty's genuinely shocked by the suggestion. This is Morty at his most innocent, refusing to engage with violence, maintaining his moral high ground, while Rick watches people purge each other with casual interest. Then Morty sees a girl being attacked and blackmails Rick into saving her by threatening to tell Beth about this field trip. They rescue Arthresia, who seems sweet and traumatized, and Morty immediately develops a crush because 14-year-old boys will fall for anyone who looks vulnerable and needs rescuing. It's basically hardwired into their operating system at that age. Rick warns that Morty's letting his wiener do the walking, which is crude but accurate, and then Arthresia shoots Rick in the liver, steals their ship, and leaves them stranded on a purge planet to die. Rick gets shot in what he describes as the hardest working liver in the galaxy, which is Rick admitting his alcoholism destroyed his liver so thoroughly that even alternate dimension livers would be impressed. They're stuck on foot during an active purge with Rick bleeding out, and that's when Rick starts pushing Morty to embrace violence and harness his repressed rage. Morty insists he doesn't have any, but circumstances keep forcing him into violent situations that slowly chip away at his resistance. First, he has to purge some rapists because Rick's injured and can't do it himself. Then, at the lighthouse, Morty sits through the Keeper's terrible screenplay about JC and Blaine and their whole 3 weeks earlier structure. When the Keeper demands honest feedback, Morty makes the mistake of giving it, and the Keeper loses his mind over the criticism. When the Keeper tries to remove their survival beacon, Morty snaps and pushes him down the stairs, breaking his neck. Then Morty stands over the corpse, asking if the Keeper wants him to cut to 3 weeks earlier when he was alive. That's Morty's first intentional kill, and it came from pure frustration about bad screenplay structure. After that, something breaks loose in Morty. When they go hunting for their ship, Morty goes on an absolute rampage set to Feels Good by Tony. Tone. Interesting music choice for mass murder, but somehow it works. Rick's trying to focus on finding the ship, but Morty's just shooting everyone in sight. Rick has to point out that some people were just hiding and didn't pose a threat. Morty doesn't care and keeps firing. Rick eventually has to tell Morty he's shooting corpses at this point, but Morty's moved past self-defense or even regular murder into desecrating bodies while screaming and laughing. When they find Arthresia with their stolen ship, Morty immediately starts screaming to kill her. Rick has to tell him to calm down because Morty's gone from refusing to watch violence to actively seeking it out like he's trying to make up for lost time. Then Morty threatens Rick directly, saying he'll purge Rick too, and that this has been a long time coming. That line, "This has been a long time coming," reveals Morty's been carrying murderous thoughts about Rick specifically. These aren't random purge-fueled threats. This is specific, personal rage that Morty's been suppressing, possibly for years. The threat is so credible that Rick has to stun Morty unconscious with some kind of taser device just to stop him from attempting grandfather murder. When Morty wakes up later, he can barely remember what happened. He's got memory gaps from the violence, like his brain was running on autopilot while his body committed atrocities. Rick and Arthresia go massacre the rich people running the purge system. Rick initially claims he's had his fill, but then joins in anyway, because apparently his fill was negotiable. The episode shows both Rick and Morty participating in extended murder sequences set to upbeat music, dancing over corpses, having the time of their lives. Then comes the conversation that sets up the lie. Morty admits he feels ashamed about what he did, and that Rick was right about him having repressed stuff to deal with. Morty's ready to confront the reality that he has darkness inside him, that maybe Rick's nihilistic worldview is correct, and everyone's capable of terrible things, given the right circumstances. Rick cuts him off with the purginol explanation. Those candy bars from earlier apparently contained a chemical that amplifies violent tendencies. Morty's immediately relieved, grateful for this pharmaceutical excuse that lets him off the hook. Rick confirms this, and adds that Morty's character is totally protected, which is both a fourth wall break, and Rick telling Morty his sense of self is safe from this uncomfortable truth. But the final shot shows Rick throwing away a candy bar wrapper with the camera, focusing on it just long enough to read the label. Now, purginol free. That label doesn't mean these bars recently had the drug removed. It means these bars never had purginol in the first place. They're specifically the purginol-free version, implying there might be drugged versions somewhere, but these definitely aren't them. Rick lied. The candy bars didn't drug them. Morty's violence was completely authentic, just his buried rage finally finding an acceptable outlet. Rick recognized this immediately. He said, "Morty, you just purged," right after the lighthouse keeper died. And Rick made the calculated decision to protect Morty from that knowledge by inventing a chemical excuse, rather than letting Morty process what actually happened. The disturbing part is that Rick would rather lie to Morty about it than let him process and deal with his actual psychological issues. Rick's essentially gaslighting Morty about his own emotional state, telling him that wasn't really him when it absolutely was. Rick's building Morty's entire self-perception on a foundation of comforting lies rather than difficult truths. Rick's motivation makes sense from his twisted perspective. If Morty realizes he's capable of enjoying murder, Morty might start questioning other things about his morality, his relationship with Rick, whether he's becoming like Rick. That kind of self-reflection could make Morty less useful as a sidekick, because you can't have Morty developing boundaries or moral standards that might interfere with adventures. Better to give him a pharmaceutical excuse and move on to the next crisis. But there's another layer to this deception. Rick comments that Morty's character is totally protected, like he's discussing the show itself. But he's also revealing that Rick actively protects Morty's self-image. Not out of love or concern for Morty's well-being, but because Rick needs Morty to maintain his sense of being the good one in their dynamic. If Morty admits he enjoyed the violence, he might start seeing himself differently, which could fundamentally change their entire relationship in ways Rick finds inconvenient. The episode also reveals Rick's own violence wasn't drug-influenced either, assuming they both ate the same candy bars. Rick participated in the massacre, danced over corpses, and had just as much fun as Morty did. Rick's violence is completely normalized and integrated into his personality, but Morty's violence is something Rick treats as needing an excuse. That double standard shows Rick knows Morty's violence is abnormal for Morty specifically, which is exactly why it needs to be explained away with fictional pharmaceuticals. The ending shows the planet's survivors, immediately suggesting another purge as a solution to their problems, proving the cycle is self-perpetuating once people experience consequence-free violence. Morty experienced that exact progression, from refusing to watch violence to actively seeking it out and shooting corpses for fun. And now he's back to believing it wasn't really him because Rick gave him permission to think that way. Morty's going to carry this buried violence forward without addressing it. The next time circumstances push him toward aggression, and they will, because every adventure with Rick involves danger and conflict, Morty won't have the purginol excuse available. He'll have to confront that his capacity for violence is part of who he is, not something induced by drugs. Or more likely, Rick will invent another lie to protect Morty's self-image, continuing the cycle of Morty never processing his actual psychological issues because Rick finds broken but functional more useful than healthy but independent. Rick chose to lie rather than help Morty confront uncomfortable truths about himself. That's not protection, that's manipulation disguised as kindness. Rick's ensuring Morty stays psychologically dependent on Rick's explanations for his behavior rather than developing genuine self-awareness. and Morty's so desperate to believe he's still the same old Morty that he accepts the lie without question, even though part of him probably knows the truth. The candy bars were never the problem. Morty's repressed rage is real, it's accessible, and it's powerful enough that Rick had to physically knock him unconscious to stop him from committing grandfather murder. Rick saw all of this, recognized what it meant, and decided the best course of action was fabricating a chemical excuse so Morty could sleep at night. That's not helping Morty grow or heal, that's keeping Morty broken in exactly the ways Rick finds most useful for their adventures together. Alright, time for the next spine-chilling theory. The big emotional moment in a certain episode has Morty thinking his relationship with Rick is special, because it spans over all those different timelines. Rick's response destroys that illusion with 2 words: "You're a camouflage." But the disturbing part is that Morty's might have been genetically engineered from the beginning, specifically to have brainwaves that cancel out Rick's genius, turning Rick's own grandchildren into biological cloaking devices by design. Close Rick counters of the Rick kind, episode 10 from season 1, starts with evil Rick and evil Morty murdering a Rick and kidnapping his Morty in a different dimension. Then moves to Rick C. 137, getting arrested by the Council of Ricks for killing 27 alternate Ricks. The council exists specifically because Rick C. 137 went on a murder rampage across dimensions, killing so many Ricks that infinite versions of himself had to band together just to survive him. That's the setup. Rick's dangerous enough that he needed an entire interdimensional government formed to contain him. When Rick and Morty arrive at the Citadel of Ricks, Morty sees thousands of Rick-Morty pairs and initially thinks this makes their bond special. Rick immediately destroys that wholesome interpretation by explaining Mortys exist for tactical purposes. Rick lays out the science. Ricks have distinct, traceable brainwaves because of their genius. The best way to hide from enemies tracking those brainwaves is to stand near someone with complementary brainwaves that cancel yours out. When a Rick is with a Morty, the genius waves get neutralized by what Rick calls Morty waves after an awkward throat-clearing pause. Morty tries to salvage some meaning from this by suggesting maybe it works because their personalities are so different, looking for any explanation that doesn't reduce him to equipment. Rick completely ignores the question and announces his portal gun was hacked remotely, changing the subject so fast it's clear he doesn't want to explore why Morty brainwaves specifically cancel Rick brainwaves. That's suspicious because Rick loves explaining science, but he suddenly gets quiet when Morty asks about the mechanism behind their neural compatibility. The episode shows the Citadel has completely normalized treating Mortys as replaceable merchandise. There's a Rick selling Morty dazzlers to turn your boring old Morty into a fashion statement. Another Rick tries to sell insurance. Every year, hundreds of Mortys are injured. There's Morty dolls, Morty accessories, an entire economy built around the assumption that Mortys are interchangeable consumer goods. The council even offers Rick a voucher for a free replacement Morty in case his current one dies or gets damaged, like they're offering a warranty on a defective product. But here's where the theory gets really disturbing. Rick takes that voucher. He initially refuses it, saying it's not a good time, but then pockets it anyway when he thinks nobody's watching. Rick just spent an entire episode with Morty, proving their bond matters. Morty saved Rick's life. Rick even cried when seeing memories of Morty, though he claimed it was allergies to dipshits. And Rick still takes the replacement voucher because on some level, Rick knows Morty is replaceable and wants that insurance policy ready. When they find evil Rick's operation, there's a dome covered in tortured Mortys being used as a massive cloaking matrix. Rick explains that one Morty is enough to hide from bureaucrats, but if you get a whole matrix of Mortys in agonizing pain, that creates a pattern that can hide even from other Ricks. Then Rick admits something that should make everyone uncomfortable. I fiddled with a concept like this once. Morty stares at him in horror, and Rick quickly adds it was on paper, but then he keeps going. You could accomplish the same result with like 5 Mortys and a jumper cable. Rick has clearly thought through the mechanics of Morty torture for tactical purposes, done the math on how many Mortys you'd need and what tools would optimize their suffering for maximum brainwave disruption. He calls evil Rick's setup barbaric overkill and criticizes it as bad craftsmanship, which means Rick's not disturbed by the torture itself. He's bothered by the inefficiency. The fact that Rick has these calculations ready suggests this isn't theoretical pondering. Rick knows exactly how many Mortys you'd need and what equipment would work best, because he's thought about this extensively, possibly even tested it in ways he's not admitting. When Rick says he wouldn't actually do it, he's not saying it's morally wrong. He's saying it's unnecessary when you could achieve the same result with fewer resources. That's efficiency optimization, not ethical objection. Here's where the theory takes shape. What if Mortys don't naturally have brainwaves that cancel Rick's genius? What if that's engineered? The specificity of the pairing is suspicious. Every Rick has a Morty, and every Morty serves the exact same tactical purpose. That's not coincidence or lucky genetics. That's design. Either Ricks have been selectively breeding their family lines to produce grandchildren with the right neural patterns, or they've been genetically modifying Mortys to serve as biological camouflage. The show establishes that Ricks can manipulate genetics. Rick builds consciousness enhancement helmets, creates hybrid species, literally builds theme parks inside people. Creating or breeding humans with specific brainwave patterns would be well within Rick's capabilities, and the payoff, perfect undetectable camouflage using your own family, would justify the effort. The fact that Mortys are 14 years old and all look roughly similar suggests there might even be accelerated aging or cloning involved to maintain a steady supply. The Citadel's infrastructure supports this theory. They have replacement vouchers ready, which means they have a supply chain for Mortys. Where do replacement Mortys come from? The episode shows Mortys being returned to their families after the evil Rick incident, but what about Mortys whose Ricks died? What about dimensions where Beth never had kids? The Citadel must be producing Mortys somehow to meet demand, whether through cloning, dimension hopping, kidnapping, or forced breeding programs. Rick's language throughout the episode treats Morty as equipment, not family. He calls Morty camouflage, a human cloaking device, a perfect, impenetrable suit of human armor. Rick says Morty is as dumb as I am smart, which frames their relationship as a calculated balance rather than natural family dynamics. When Rick tells Morty the point of being a Rick is being a Rick, he's defining his identity around not conforming to systems, but he's perfectly fine conforming to the system of using Mortys as shields. The episode reveals Rick C-137 went on a murder spree, killing infinite Ricks, and during that rampage, he would have needed camouflage to avoid detection. That means Rick has been using Mortys as shields for years, possibly decades, while hunting other Ricks. If Rick understood Morty brainwaves cancel his own, he would have sought out or created Mortys specifically for this tactical advantage. The current Morty might not even be Rick's first DOS. Rick could have burned through multiple Mortys during his revenge quest and replaced them as needed. The episode's ending reinforces Rick's view of Morty as tactical asset rather than person. Rick tells Morty he's the Rickest Rick with the Mortiest Morty, which sounds like a compliment but actually means Morty is maximally useful as a shield because he's maximally stupid. Rick immediately warns that a cocky Morty could lead to some big problems, and refuses to explain what he means, saying he'll tell Morty when he's older. That suggests Rick knows exactly what happens when Mortys develop independence or intelligence. They stop being effective camouflage and become threats instead. Evil Morty's reveal at the end proves this fear is justified. Evil Morty was controlling evil Rick the entire time, using a Rick as his puppet to enact his revenge against the system. The episode shows that sufficiently motivated and intelligent Mortys can absolutely overthrow Ricks, which is exactly why Ricks would want to keep Mortys dumb and dependent. If Mortys were designed to be stupid specifically to make them better shields, then evil Morty represents the nightmare scenario, where the human cloaking device wakes up and realizes it's been enslaved. The most damning evidence is Rick's complete lack of surprise at any of this. When confronted with the Morty torture dome, Rick isn't horrified, he's critical of the engineering. When offered a replacement Morty voucher, Rick doesn't refuse on principle, he takes it for insurance. When Morty asks if he's just a tool, Rick doesn't deny it, he tells Morty it's his choice to take it personally. Rick has completely internalized that Mortys are equipment, which suggests this view is built into how Ricks conceptualize the Rick-Morty relationship from the beginning. The theory suggests every Rick-Morty pair across infinite dimensions exists because Ricks engineered their own grandchildren to be biological camouflage, not through individual choice, but through collective design. Either the original Ricks who invented portal technology, discovered the brainwave cancellation effect, and selectively bred for it, or the Council of Ricks maintains cloning programs and genetic modification to ensure every Rick gets a properly tuned Morty. Either way, Mortys don't exist as people with their own purposes. They exist as living shields, designed from birth to cancel out Rick's traceable genius. And the worst part? Morty will never get a straight answer about this. Rick refuses to explain why Morty's brainwaves specifically cancel his own. The Council won't tell him because maintaining the lie is essential to keeping Mortys compliant. If Mortys knew they were genetically designed to be disposable shields, they'd rebel, like evil Morty did. So the system keeps them ignorant, keeps them dependent, keeps them thinking they're family, when really they're equipment with above-average emotional attachment to their users. Rick taking that replacement voucher is him admitting he knows the truth about what Mortys are and what they're for. Rick knows Morty is replaceable because every Morty is fundamentally the same. 14 years old, anxious, easily manipulated, and equipped with brainwaves specifically tuned to hide Rick from his enemies. That's not coincidence. That's product design. Let's keep the momentum going with the next disturbing idea. The opening of a certain episode shows Morty traumatized by something called the Truth Tortoise, begging Rick to erase the memory because he can't go on with that knowledge in his head. Rick acts like this is routine and reveals an entire underground archive of memories he's removed from Morty. But the Truth Tortoise incident is different from every other memory in that archive, because the transcript shows that learning absolute truth literally started collapsing their entire dimension, proving that some knowledge is dangerous enough to destroy reality itself. Morty's Mind Blowers, Episode 8 from Season 3, opens with Rick and Morty being chased by a goth-looking creature through an MC. Escher-style dimension where gravity works in impossible directions. They're carrying a crystal-covered tortoise, and the creature is screaming at them to return it. Rick warns Morty about the specific danger. Whatever you do, don't drop the Truth Tortoise. Also, really important, whatever you do, don't look into its eyes. Morty immediately confesses he's already broken that rule. I did look at it, Rick. I've been looking at it. Rick's response isn't anger or concern for Morty's well-being. It's recognition of catastrophe. Now you're gonna know everything, Morty. Good job. Way to go. You fucked everything up. That phrasing, you fucked everything up, suggests consequences beyond just Morty being traumatized. Rick's talking about systemic failure, not psychological damage. The Truth Tortoise speaks directly into Morty's mind. The transcript notes, Morty hears the Truth Tortoise's speech in his head, delivering information that Morty can't handle. Before the goth creature can retrieve the tortoise, Morty throws it down a pink vortex, removing the source of the truth. And here's where the theory gets its evidence. The dimension starts collapsing from its foundations until the transcript cuts off there, implying they barely escape as their reality disintegrates around them. That's not metaphorical collapse. That's literal dimensional breakdown triggered by Morty learning absolute truth. The knowledge itself destabilizes reality enough to cause structural failure in the fabric of space-time. Whatever the Truth Tortoise told Morty was information dangerous enough to unmake the dimension containing it. Back at the Smith house, Morty sits on the couch looking distressed and baggy-eyed, unable to function with that Truth Tortoise shit in his head. Rick casually suggests watching Interdimensional Cable. Remember when they used to do that? Trying to distract Morty with entertainment. But Morty can't be distracted. I can't go on. I can't go on like this with the Truth Tortoise shit in my head. Then Morty starts to say he wishes Rick could erase the memory, and Rick finishes his sentence before he can complete it. Erase the memory from your mind? Morty gets immediately suspicious. How did you know I was gonna say that? That's Morty catching on that this isn't the first time they've had this exact conversation. Rick's already erased this memory before, possibly multiple times, and Morty's pattern of requesting erasure is predictable enough that Rick knows what he's about to ask. Rick takes Morty to his secret underground archive, a massive circular room filled with thousands of color-coded vials containing extracted memories. Rick explains these are all the experiences you've begged me to remove from your life, lest you go insane. The phrasing "lest you go insane" frames these removals as mental health interventions, but the Truth Tortoise memory operates differently from the others shown in the episode. The other memories in the archive are embarrassing mistakes. The Moon Man incident, where Morty got someone killed over a smudge on a telescope lens, family trauma, Beth choosing Summer over Morty, or uncomfortable truths about the universe, the Floop-Floopian afterlife crisis. These are memories that make Morty feel bad about himself or his place in the world. They're psychologically damaging but not physically dangerous. The Truth Tortoise memory is unique because it caused immediate dimensional collapse. That's not psychological trauma, that's ontological threat. The dimension didn't start falling apart because Morty felt sad about what he learned. It collapsed because the knowledge itself is incompatible with stable reality. Whatever truth the tortoise revealed, it's something that cannot coexist with functioning dimensional structure. Rick's warning to not look into the tortoise's eyes suggests he knew this would happen. Rick's been to enough dimensions and seen enough weird artifacts to recognize a truth tortoise and understand its danger. When Rick says you fucked everything up, he's not being hyperbolic. Morty actually destroyed their dimensional stability by learning something he wasn't supposed to know. The goth creature chasing them was trying to prevent exactly this outcome. It wasn't protecting the tortoise's treasure, it was preventing dimensional collapse by keeping people from accessing dangerous truth. When Morty threw the tortoise into the vortex, he removed the source, but the damage was already done. The knowledge had already been transmitted, and the dimension was already collapsing. Here's where the theory gets really disturbing. Rick has technology that can erase memories, which means Rick has probably encountered this situation before, across multiple dimensions. The Truth Tortoise might be a known hazard in interdimensional travel, an artifact that reveals truths incompatible with stable reality. Rick knows to warn against looking at it because he's seen what happens when people do. The dimension collapsing from its foundations suggests the truth affects reality at its most basic level. Maybe the Truth Tortoise reveals that their dimension is a simulation, or that it's scheduled for termination, or that it's already in the process of unraveling, and everyone's just living in the final moments stretched out subjectively. Maybe it reveals that none of them are real, or that Rick's technology is accelerating their reality's heat death, or that every action they take is scripted, and they have no agency. Whatever the truth is, it's so fundamentally incompatible with existence that learning it starts breaking down the dimensional structure. That's beyond disturbing. That's cosmic horror on a scale where knowledge itself becomes a weapon against reality. The Truth Tortoise tells you things that make your dimension untenable. Rick's immediate solution is memory erasure, which he's clearly prepared for. He doesn't try to help Morty process the information or find a way to stabilize the dimension while retaining the knowledge. He goes straight to deletion, because that's the only solution. The truth can't be integrated or accepted. It has to be removed completely, or it continues threatening dimensional stability. The archive shows Rick has removed this memory before Rick mentions, "There's no dust on it, because this isn't the first time we've done this." Which means Morty has looked into the Truth Tortoise's eyes multiple times across different adventures. Each time, Morty learns the truth. The dimension starts collapsing. Rick erases the memory, and they start over. Morty's trapped in a loop where he keeps accessing forbidden knowledge and having it forcibly removed. This raises the question, does erasing Morty's memory actually fix the dimensional collapse, or does it just stop the collapse from progressing further? If the truth is that their reality is fundamentally unstable, removing Morty's knowledge of that instability doesn't make the reality more stable. It just prevents Morty from accelerating the collapse by believing in it. The episode's title, Morty's Mind Blowers, frames these as entertaining mistakes and traumatic experiences, but the Truth Tortoise incident is something else entirely. It's evidence that there are truths in the Rick and Morty universe that cannot be safely known, that some information is so destructive that it breaks reality at a structural level. The goth creature's desperate attempt to retrieve the tortoise, Rick's specific warning about the eyes, the immediate dimensional collapse, all of it points to the Truth Tortoise being one of the universe's most dangerous artifacts. And Rick has the technology to make people forget they've encountered it, which he uses routinely to prevent dimensional collapse. That's not protecting Morty from psychological trauma, Rick's not being I. That's protecting their entire dimension from ontological breakdown. Rick's not being kind by erasing the memory. He's being practical, because the alternative is living in a dimension that's actively collapsing because someone knows too much. The most disturbing implication is that Rick probably knows what the Truth Tortoise reveals. He clearly knows it's dangerous, or he wouldn't warn against it, which means Rick is living with knowledge that would collapse dimensions if other people learned it. Rick's nihilism and alcoholism might be coping mechanisms for someone carrying information that literally breaks reality when shared. Morty will probably look into the Truth Tortoise's eyes again in some future adventure, learn the truth again, have his dimension collapse again, and have Rick erase it again. That's the loop they're trapped in. Morty seeking answers, finding truth that destroys reality, and having his memory wiped to save their dimension. And Rick facilitates this cycle by continuing to take Morty on adventures where they encounter things like Truth Tortoises, knowing that eventually Morty will look, and they'll have to start over. The Truth Tortoise blows their entire dimensional structure, proving that some knowledge is too dangerous to exist, and must be systematically erased to prevent reality from unraveling. That's the most disturbing reveal in an episode full of disturbing content. Confirmation that there are truths Rick actively suppresses, not because they're emotionally harmful, but because they're existentially catastrophic. Okay, get ready for our next creepy theory. Hit that subscribe button and join the crew for more deep dives like this. The ending of a certain episode reveals something horrifying that everyone treats as a victory. Earth was competing in the final season of a reality show that had been running for 988 seasons, which means the Cromulons have been systematically destroying civilizations for entertainment across nearly a millennium of broadcasts, and Earth only survived because they happened to arrive for the series finale rather than any earlier season. Get Swifty, episode 5 from season 2, starts with a giant yellow head appearing in Earth's sky, demanding, "Show me what you got." Rick immediately knows what's happening. He recognizes them as Cromulons from the Cygnus 5 expanse and knows exactly what they want. A live performance of a newly written, catchy, original song. Rick's seen enough of the galaxy to identify them on sight, which means he's encountered evidence of their reality show before, possibly visited worlds they've destroyed, or heard stories about planet music from survivors. Earth gets transported to a new location with 4 other planets, all surrounded by different colored cromulons watching from space. A garbled signal reveals the setup. We asked them to show us what they got, and they did. Now we'll see which of them has got the most. 24 hours, 5 planets, 5 songs. But in the end, there can only be one. Planet music. All participation is involuntary. Disqualified and losing planets are disintegrated by plasma ray. That last part is the key. Disqualified and losing planets are disintegrated. Not conquered or enslaved or transported somewhere else. Disintegrated. Complete annihilation. Every planet that loses gets destroyed along with everyone on it, and this happens every single season as entertainment for giant floating heads. The episode shows this happening in real time. The first competing planet is Parblesnops, represented by a group called the Greeby Bobes. Their performer makes a moral stand: hold it, stop. Music isn't about competition or captivity. If you love music, you love freedom. Let these worlds be free, please. The Cromulon's response is immediate: disqualified. The plasma ray powers up and fires at the planet, blowing it up completely. The Cromulon casually comments, "There's one every season," treating moral resistance to genocide as a recurring minor annoyance in their entertainment format. "There's one every season" means this has happened 987 times before, at minimum. 987 previous seasons, where at least one civilization tried to resist or protest their captivity and was immediately vaporized for it. The Cromulons have this response so automated and predictable that they can joke about it while committing planetary genocide on live television. The competition format guarantees multiple civilizations die per season. 5 planets compete, only 1 survives. That's 4 civilizations minimum destroyed every season just from losing the competition, plus however many get disqualified for protesting, like the Greeby Bobes. If we assume the standard format is 5 planets per season with 4 losers, that's 3,948 civilizations destroyed across 988 seasons, not counting disqualifications or other rule violations. Earth almost joined that death toll. When Rick's initial song performance goes poorly, the Cromulons start looking angry. Principal Vagina is about to sacrifice Beth and Jerry to appease them. The plasma ray begins charging up when General Nathan launches nuclear missiles at the Cromulons, causing them to declare Earth disqualified. The plasma ray points at Earth and begins firing. Earth was seconds away from complete annihilation, saved only because Ice-T blocked the beam with his body while Rick and Morty prepared their second song. Here's the disturbing part. Earth only survived because they were season 988. The Cromulon announces, after 988 seasons of planet music, the Cromulons have decided to declare Earth the final winner and bring our musical reality show to a conclusion. Goodbye. Earth didn't win because they were exceptionally talented. They won because the Cromulons decided to end their show, and Earth happened to be the final contestant when that decision was made. If Earth had been transported for season 987 instead of 988, they would have been destroyed, regardless of how well they performed, because the show would have continued. If they'd arrived for season 500, or season 200, or season 50, Earth would be gone. The entire human species, all of Earth's history and culture and potential, everything would have been disintegrated by plasma ray, because they weren't entertaining enough, or because they lost to a better performance, or because some general launched missiles in panic. The episode never explains why the Cromulons decided to end their show after 988 seasons. Maybe they got bored. Maybe they ran out of civilizations to abduct. Maybe 988 is some significant number in their culture. But the decision appears completely arbitrary. They just announce they're done and leave. Thousands of civilizations destroyed across nearly a millennium of broadcasts, and the whole thing ends because the Cromulons felt like stopping. Rick's immediate recognition of the Cromulons reveals he knew this was happening across the galaxy. He's seen enough of the galaxy to identify them and understand their system, which means Rick has encountered evidence of planet music before. Maybe he's visited planets that were destroyed and saw the aftermath. Maybe he's heard stories from refugees who escaped before their worlds were disintegrated. Maybe he's seen recordings of previous seasons of the show. But Rick never warned Earth. He never tried to prevent this or prepare humanity for the possibility. He just showed up when the Cromulons arrived and helped Earth compete in their death game. Rick didn't seem surprised or outraged that an advanced species was running a genocidal reality show. He just provided technical assistance and wrote a song about getting swifty and taking a shit on the floor. The casualness of the whole operation is what makes it most disturbing. The Cromulons aren't portrayed as evil conquerors or malevolent destroyers. They're entertainment executives running a talent competition that happens to have planetary annihilation as the stakes. They have production values, commercial breaks, probably advertisers. The Cromulon literally uses reality TV language. There's one every season, and moving on to planet Arboles Meteorosos, like they're transitioning between segments. At the end, Mr. Goldenfold asks, "Did he just say musical reality show?" And Jerry responds, "Yeah, it's possible that we may have been correlating some things that weren't actually related at all." They're realizing the religious cult they formed around the giant heads was pointless because the heads weren't gods, they were TV producers. But nobody seems to process that they just survived a genocidal entertainment format that's been running for nearly 1,000 seasons. The episode treats Earth's survival as a victory worth celebrating. Everyone at Area 51 cheers, the president hugs Rick, iced tea becomes water tea, and returns home to Alphabetrium. But the actual outcome is that Earth got incredibly, impossibly lucky. They were the final season of a show that had destroyed thousands of civilizations before them, and they survived only because the Cromulons arbitrarily decided to end their program. Every other civilization that competed in planet music is gone. The greeby bobes from Parble Snops, who protested their captivity, UNT, disintegrated. The Arbolian Meteorososians, who played their simple song, 19.5, probably disintegrated when they lost. The planet called Chunky Tunk, mentioned in the transcript, planet after planet after planet across 988 seasons, all destroyed to feed Cromulon entertainment needs. And the Cromulons faced no consequences. They didn't apologize or offer reparations. They just announced the show was over and left, presumably going back to whatever dimension they came from to enjoy retirement after nearly a millennium of genocidal broadcasting. Earth can't retaliate because the Cromulons' control technology advanced enough to transport entire planets across space and disintegrate them with plasma rays. They're functionally untouchable. Rick knows all of this. He recognized the Cromulons immediately, understood their demands, knew about their reality show format. That means Rick has been aware that thousands of civilizations have been destroyed by planet music, and he never tried to stop it or warn potential victims. He just helped Earth compete when their turn came, the same way he'd probably help any other planet if he happened to be there when the Cromulons arrived. The most disturbing implication is that planet music probably isn't unique. If the Cromulons have been running this show for 988 seasons without interference, there might be other species running similar operations elsewhere in the galaxy. Other advanced civilizations using less evolved planets as entertainment, running their own versions of deadly competitions with involuntary participation and genocidal consequences for losing. Rick's seen enough of the galaxy to recognize the Cromulons, which suggests he's encountered multiple versions of this same pattern. Earth survived through dumb luck and arbitrary timing. The episode frames this as Earth's musical superiority. Ice-T says, "I'd like to hear what Rick and Morty have to play," but the Cromulons had already decided to end the show. They were going to declare someone the final winner regardless. Earth just happened to be performing when that decision was implemented. If the Cromulons had transported 5 different planets for season 988, one of those planets would be celebrating their survival instead, and Earth would have been disintegrated seasons earlier without ever knowing why. That's the horror. Nearly 1,000 civilizations destroyed for entertainment, and Earth avoided that fate, not through skill or virtue or technological advancement, but through sheer random chance of being the final contestants in a show that was ending anyway. And everyone treats this as a happy ending while Rick takes a selfie with the president and turns generals into snakes, nobody acknowledging that they just survived one of the galaxy's longest-running genocides disguised as reality television. Let's step into the next disturbing rabbit hole. The emotional climax of a certain episode shows Rick saving his best friend's life by revealing Bird Person has a child he never knew existed. Everyone treats this as Rick doing something heroic, but the episode explicitly confirms Rick only revealed the child's existence when it became tactically necessary to save his own life. Rick was perfectly willing to let Bird Person remain ignorant that he had a kid suffering on a prison asteroid, because telling him might make Bird Person too busy with parenting to be Rick's adventure buddy. Rickternal Friendshine of the Spotless Mort, Episode 8 from Season 5, opens with Rick entering Bird Person's mind to rescue him from a coma. Bird Person's consciousness has retreated deep into his unconscious mind, essentially trying to commit mental suicide after being killed by his wife Tammy at his wedding, then resurrected as a cyborg by the Federation. Rick travels through Bird Person's memories trying to convince him to live, but bird person keeps insisting he wants to die. The turning point comes when Memory Rick, a younger version of Rick that exists in bird person's memories, reveals a crucial piece of information. When confronting Memory Tammy in bird person's mind, Memory Rick asks, "Are you gonna tell him?" and then drops the bombshell. "I bet she didn't even tell you about the kid." Bird person is shocked. "About the what? I am sorry. I think I'd know if I had a kid." Memory Rick explains that he's a memory, so he only knows what bird person knows. And bird person doesn't know because an army of brainalyzer protocols walled off any memories post-Phoenix person. The Federation suppressed all of bird person's memories from after they resurrected him, which means they intentionally hid his child's existence from him. Memory Rick, who at this point is speaking with real Rick's knowledge since he crossed over from Rick's mind, reveals the disturbing details. "Listen, if you won't live for yourself, live for the half bird person, half megabitch that's eating worms on a prison asteroid. Bird person has a child. That child is half Tammy, the woman who betrayed and murdered him. That child is imprisoned on an asteroid. That child is suffering enough that eating worms is their current survival situation, and bird person had no idea any of this existed. This revelation works. Bird person decides to live specifically because of his child. I have made a decision. I would now like to live." Rick successfully saved his friend's life by revealing information that gave bird person a reason to continue existing. Everyone treats this as heroic friendship, Rick risking his life to save his best friend and reunite him with his child. But the ending reveals the disturbing truth. After they escape bird person's mind and return to reality, bird person confronts Rick with a very specific question. "Rick, I do not like to pull threads. It is a disruptive and feline activity, but I must ask, was there really a second in there where you knew about my child, but chose not to inform me on the chance I might then grow too busy child-rearing to hang out?" Rick deflects with a joke. "Oh, weird way to thank me for discovering your kid." Bird person doesn't let him off the hook. He states the facts clearly. "You did not know of the child when you came to rescue me, and once aware, refrained from sharing until necessary to save yourself." Rick doesn't deny this. He just says, "Fair enough," and accepts that bird person now understands what happened. The episode ends with their friendship damaged, bird person walking away saying, "I will see you when I see you," rather than expressing gratitude or maintaining their previous closeness. Let's break down what actually happened here. Rick went into bird person's mind to save his life. While exploring those memories, Rick discovered evidence that bird person has a child. Rick's immediate reaction wasn't, "I need to tell my friend about his kid." It was calculating whether revealing this information served his purposes. Rick kept the child's existence secret while trying other methods to convince bird person to live. Only when Rick and Memory Rick were about to be killed by Memory Tammy, when Rick's own life was in danger and he'd exhausted other options, did Rick finally reveal the child's existence. Rick used bird person's child as a tactical card to play when he needed it, not as information his friend deserved to know immediately. The truly disturbing part is Rick's initial motivation for hiding this. Bird person asks if Rick concealed the child's existence because he worried bird person might then grow too busy child-rearing to hang out. Rick doesn't deny this concern. He deflects and jokes, which is Rick's standard response when caught doing something indefensible. His non-denial confirms what bird person suspected. Rick prioritized maintaining access to his friend over reuniting that friend with his imprisoned child. Think about what this means. Bird person's child is on a prison asteroid. That's not a metaphor or exaggeration. 1C, the kid is literally imprisoned, surviving on worms, suffering in captivity. This child exists because Tammy, a Federation agent, seduced bird person, married him, and betrayed him at their wedding. The child is probably being used as leverage or propaganda by the Federation, or maybe just abandoned to suffer as punishment for being a terrorist's offspring. Rick discovered all of this during his mission to save bird person. Rick had the power to immediately tell bird person, "Hey, you have a kid who's imprisoned and suffering. We need to rescue them." Instead, Rick calculated whether revealing this information might make bird person less available for adventures. Rick literally weighed "my friend's child is imprisoned and suffering" against, but if he knows about the kid, he might be busy parenting instead of hanging out with me, and decided the second concern was more important. Rick only revealed the child when it became tactically necessary to save his own life, not when it would help bird person most, not when it would help the child most. Only when Rick personally needed that information to function as leverage. Rick used bird person's imprisoned child as a bargaining chip in his own survival, then tried to take credit for discovering the kid as if he'd been searching for this information to help his friend. The episode explicitly confirms Rick's thought process through bird person's accusation. Bird Person knows Rick well enough to understand exactly what happened. Rick found out about the child, calculated the implications for their friendship, and decided withholding the information served his interests better than sharing it. Rick doesn't defend himself because there's no defense. Bird Person is completely correct about Rick's motivations and behavior. This reveals something deeply disturbing about how Rick approaches friendship. Rick values his relationships. Clearly, he literally risks his life entering Bird Person's mind to save him. But Rick values those relationships primarily for what they provide him. He wants Bird Person alive and functional so they can continue having adventures together. When information threatens that dynamic, like Bird Person having a child who needs rescuing and raising, Rick's instinct is to suppress that information to maintain the status quo. Rick treats his best friend's child, his best friend's imprisoned, suffering child, as a tactical resource to be deployed strategically, rather than information. Bird Person deserves to know immediately. That's not friendship operating on normal human values. That's friendship operating on pure utility calculation, where even a child's suffering gets weighed against Rick's convenience. The child makes this especially horrifying. If Rick had hidden information about Bird Person's car being impounded, or his old apartment still having stuff in it, that would be selfish, but understandable. But this is a child, a living person who is Bird Person's offspring, who is imprisoned, who is suffering. Rick assessed that situation and decided, I'll tell him about this later, maybe, if it becomes necessary, because right now telling him might interfere with our friendship dynamic. Rick's deflection at the end, weird way to thank me for discovering your kid, is particularly grotesque, because it tries to reframe Rick's tactical deployment of information as a favor he did for Bird Person. Rick wants credit for revealing what he deliberately concealed. He wants gratitude for information he withheld until it served his purposes. That's not heroism, that's manipulation, attempting to disguise itself as generosity. Bird Person sees through this completely, which is why the episode ends with their friendship damaged. Bird Person saved his life and learned he has a child, but he also learned his best friend was willing to keep that child secret to maintain convenient access to Bird Person's companionship. That's a betrayal operating on a level that's hard to forgive because it reveals Rick's core priorities. Rick's convenience matters more than Bird Person's child's welfare. The episode never shows what happens next, whether they rescue the child, whether Bird Person successfully reconnects with his kid, whether the child even survives. The focus stays on Rick's calculated betrayal and Bird Person's recognition of what his friend is willing to do. Rick saved Bird Person's life, but he also revealed he's the kind of person who will hide a suffering child's existence from their parent if revealing it might be inconvenient. That's not a friend. That's someone who values relationships purely for what they provide, willing to cause enormous harm to maintain convenient arrangements. And Rick knows it. His lack of defense, his deflection to humor, his acceptance of Bird Person's accusation, all confirm he understands exactly what he did and why it's indefensible. Rick just doesn't care enough to change, because caring more might make his life less convenient. And Rick's convenience apparently matters more than anything else, including his best friend's imprisoned child. Now it's time to uncover the next dark theory. Don't forget to subscribe, we've got plenty more coming soon. The ending of a certain episode is played as a triumphant victory, where Rick saves the day and reunites his family. But Rick explicitly confesses to Morty that everything was calculated manipulation. He deliberately destroyed Beth and Jerry's marriage, orchestrated events to make himself irreplaceable, and only rescued his grandchildren as leverage to control his daughter. Rick didn't save his family. He systematically dismantled their independence and installed himself as their permanent dictator, and he's threatening to gaslight anyone who tries to expose the truth. The Rick Shank Rick-demption, Episode 1 from Season 3, ends with Rick explaining exactly what he did and why he did it. After Beth tells Jerry he's going to spend some time divorced, Rick pulls Morty aside for a conversation that reveals the entire season premiere was a hostile takeover disguised as a rescue mission. Rick starts with the obvious confession, "Not so fast, Morty. You heard your mom. We've got adventures to go on, Morty. Just you and me, and sometimes your sister, and sometimes your mom, but never your dad. You want to know why, Morty? Because he crossed me." Morty tries to de-escalate. "Okay, take it easy, Rick. That's dark." But Rick doubles down. "Oh, it gets darker, Morty. Welcome to the darkest year of our adventures. First thing that's different, no more dad, Morty." Then Rick explains his methodology. "He threatened to turn me into the government, so I made him and the government go away." That's not hyperbole or exaggeration. Rick is stating clearly that Jerry threatened him, which happened. Jerry gave Beth the ultimatum of choosing between him and Rick. So, Rick eliminated both Jerry and the entire Galactic Federation government as retaliation. Rick crashed an intergalactic government's economy, causing society-wide chaos, mass violence, and complete governmental collapse across Earth, and presumably countless other planets, partially as revenge against his son-in-law for daring to set a boundary. Rick continues, "I've replaced them both as the de facto patriarch of your family and your universe." Rick's explicitly taking over as the dominant authority figure for both the family unit and their entire reality. That's not grandfather coming home, that's a coup. Then Rick reveals the truly disturbing part about Morty and Summer's rescue. "Your mom wouldn't have accepted me if I came home without you and your sister, so now you know the real reason I rescued you." Rick didn't save his grandchildren because he loved them or because they were in danger. He rescued them because they were necessary props in his manipulation of Beth. Rick needed to come home looking like a hero who saved the kids, because that's the only way Beth would accept him back into the family. The entire rescue operation, FUDO, the prison break, the Citadel infiltration, the dramatic showdown with the Council of Ricks, anyone. All of it was theater designed to manufacture a scenario where Beth would welcome Rick back as the family's savior. Rick makes his position even clearer. "Oh, I just took over the family, Morty, and if you tell your mom or sister I said any of this, I'll deny it, and they'll take my side, because I'm a hero, Morty." This is Rick explicitly threatening Morty with gaslighting. Rick has constructed a narrative where he's the heroic grandfather who destroyed an oppressive government and rescued his grandchildren from certain death. If Morty tries to tell anyone that Rick engineered everything for control, Rick will deny it, and Beth and Summer will believe Rick because his hero narrative is more appealing than the truth. Rick has weaponized his own perceived heroism as a silencing mechanism. Then comes the threat, "And now you're gonna have to go and do whatever I say, Morty, forever." Rick isn't asking for Morty's cooperation or suggesting they go on adventures together. He's stating that Morty is now under Rick's complete control permanently. The forever isn't hyperbole. Rick means Morty has no escape from this arrangement. Rick has engineered circumstances so that Morty has to comply with whatever Rick demands, or else face the consequences of trying to expose Rick's manipulation, while Rick denies everything and turns the family against him. Let's examine what Rick actually did to achieve this takeover. Jerry gave Beth an ultimatum: choose between her father and her husband. This is a boundary-setting behavior. Jerry recognized Rick was dangerous and destabilizing their family, so he tried to protect his family by forcing a choice. Jerry's approach was clumsy and controlling, but his underlying concern that Rick causes chaos and harm was legitimate. Rick's response to this boundary was to systematically destroy everything Jerry represented. Rick turned himself into the Federation, allowed himself to be captured and interrogated, all as part of a long game plan to collapse the Federation government from the inside. While imprisoned, Rick hacked the Brainalyzer, transferred his consciousness through multiple bodies, infiltrated the Federation's maximum security facility, accessed their financial systems, and crashed their entire currency by changing a 1 to a 0. The result was immediate societal collapse. On Earth specifically, the transcript shows aliens being drawn and quartered in the school courtyard, with this technically counting as patriotism. Mr. Goldenfold celebrates that no longer will the insects have domain over surface world. People are violently killing Federation members in public executions. The government that had been running Earth for months suddenly disappeared, leaving a power vacuum filled with mob violence and chaos. Rick caused this, all of it, and his stated motivation wasn't liberating humanity from oppression. It was revenge against Jerry and positioning himself to take over his family. Rick admits he made him and the government go away because Jerry crossed him. The galactic government collapse was partly a side effect of personal vendetta. Then there's the manipulation of Beth. Throughout the episode, Beth is processing her feelings about Rick abandoning the family. She tells Summer, "Don't make my mistakes, Summer. Don't deify the people that leave you." Beth recognizes she's built up Rick as an idealized figure and that this idealization has damaged her. She's trying to protect Summer from repeating her pattern. But then Rick comes back as the hero who destroyed the oppressive government and rescued the kids. He gives Beth exactly what she wants, the fantasy father who's powerful enough to solve every problem and who chooses to stay with her this time. Rick constructed this scenario deliberately, knowing Beth's psychology well enough to understand she'd accept him back if he returned as a rescuing hero, rather than just showing up, asking for forgiveness. Rick even admits he never will leave Beth again, but this promise is part of the manipulation. He's not staying because he genuinely wants to prioritize his daughter's well-being. He's staying because he's successfully installed himself as patriarch and now has the control he wanted. The promise not to leave is really a promise to maintain his position of power. The divorce between Beth and Jerry happens almost immediately after Rick's return. Beth tells Jerry he's going to spend some time divorced, within minutes of Rick coming back. This isn't coincidence. Rick's heroic return recontextualized the ultimatum Jerry gave. Now Jerry looks like the controlling husband who tried to keep Beth from her heroic father. Rick's manipulation made Jerry's boundary setting look like the unreasonable demand it sort of was, and Beth chose her father over her husband, exactly as Rick planned. Rick even admits this was intentional. I made him and the government go away, and I've replaced them both as the de facto patriarch. Rick engineered Jerry and Beth's divorce. By making himself indispensable and positioning Jerry as the antagonist, Rick created conditions where Beth would choose him over Jerry, effectively removing Jerry from power in the family structure and installing Rick as the authority figure. The most disturbing aspect is Rick's explicit threat to gaslight everyone. Rick knows what he did was manipulative and wrong. That's why he needs to threaten Morty into silence. Rick tells Morty that if he reveals any of this, Rick will deny it, and people will believe Rick, because I'm a hero, Morty. Rick has thought through the consequences of exposure and prepared his defense in advance. Deny everything, and rely on his hero narrative to make people doubt Morty's accusations. This means Rick knows his family would reject him if they understood his true motivations. Rick isn't honest about his manipulation because honesty would cost him the control he just established. He needs Beth to believe he returned because he loves his family, needs Summer to think she was rescued because she matters to him, needs everyone to think the government collapse was about liberation rather than personal revenge. The truth would undermine everything, so Rick constructs a web of lies and threatens to gaslight anyone who challenges the narrative. Then there's the Szechuan sauce rant that follows. Rick shifts from his serious confession about taking over the family to an absurd rant about McDonald's dipping sauce. I'm not driven by avenging my dead family, Morty. That was fake. I'm driven by finding that McNugget sauce. This could be Rick deflecting from the disturbing things he just said by pivoting to absurdity. Or it could be Rick testing whether Morty will challenge the obviously false narrative. If Morty accepts that Rick's entire motivation is sauce, rather than processing the confession of family manipulation, then Rick knows Morty won't be a threat to his control. Either way, Rick ends his confession with nonsense, leaving Morty confused about what was real and what was performance. But the confession about taking over the family can't be dismissed as easily as the sauce rant. Rick explicitly states he made Jerry and the government go away, replaced them as patriarch, rescued the kids to manipulate Beth, and will deny everything while forcing Morty to obey him forever. Those aren't ambiguous statements or jokes. They're clear admissions of systematic manipulation and control. Rick didn't save his family. He executed a hostile takeover that involved allowing himself to be imprisoned as part of a long con, then collapsing an intergalactic government partly for personal revenge against his son-in-law. He rescued his grandchildren primarily as props to manipulate his daughter, rather than because they were in danger, then engineered his daughter's divorce by making himself indispensable while positioning Jerry as the antagonist. Rick installed himself as permanent patriarch with complete authority over the family structure, then threatened to gaslight anyone who challenges his heroic narrative by denying everything and leveraging his perceived heroism. Finally, Rick holds Morty hostage with explicit threats that Morty must obey him forever, or face denial and family manipulation, trapping Morty in permanent servitude while the rest of the family celebrates their rescue. And everyone celebrates this as a victory. Beth is happy her father is back. Summer is excited about the government collapse. Morty is confused but goes along with it. The family treats Rick as their savior, exactly as Rick intended, while Rick privately admits to Morty that everything was calculated manipulation designed to give Rick permanent control over their family structure and ensure Morty's servitude forever. That's not a rescue. That's a takeover disguised as heroism, with the victims celebrating their own manipulation because they don't understand what actually happened to them. Moving on, this next one might haunt you a bit. Rickmancing the Stone is basically Mad Max meets family therapy, except the therapy is Rick deliberately ruining his granddaughter's relationship by introducing suburban infrastructure to a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Summer starts dating Hemorrhage, a Deathstalker raider who wears a metal bucket on his head and participates in recreational cannibalism. You know, normal relationship stuff. And they actually develop genuine emotional intimacy despite the whole "we're violent wasteland raiders" situation. Then Rick decides this relationship needs to end, so he gives the Deathstalkers modern electricity and plumbing, transforming their anarchic wasteland into boring suburbs, complete with lawn mowing and grocery runs. Summer and Hemorrhage's relationship immediately falls apart because apparently love can survive the apocalypse, but dies instantly when confronted with a white picket fence. The theory suggests Hemorrhage was actually Summer's healthiest relationship. Hemorrhage, He loved her completely, accepted her darkness. They wanted to build a life with her. And Rick destroyed it not because Summer needed to come home, but because Rick couldn't handle Summer being happy with someone who wasn't him. In Rickmancing the Stone, Season 3, Episode 2, the Smith family is falling apart post-divorce. Beth and Jerry are separated, and Summer's handling it by becoming the most aggressive teen in the multiverse. Rick portals the kids to a Mad Max-style post-apocalyptic Earth to collect isotope 322, and Summer immediately loves it. I fucking love post-apocalyptic versions of Earth. That's not healthy grief processing. That's someone who looked at her parents' divorce and decided, you know what would help? Vehicular homicide. When Deathstalkers attack them, Summer shoots out a tire, flips a car, and executes the driver who begs, kill me, please. Summer's response? Okay, but not because you told me to. Then she poses with one foot on his corpse. Morty's screaming, Summer, like he's trying to bring her back from the edge, but Summer's already jumped off that edge and landed in definitely not okay territory. Enter Hemorrhage, the Deathstalker leader. He looks at Summer's violence and basically says, you're hired. His pitch, you have removed weak blood from us and made us stronger. We can combine our strength and feast on the weak together. Rick sees the giant glowing rock of isotope 322 the Deathstalkers worship and makes an executive decision. Kids, weird pitch. Let's have this be our new life. Let's be post-apocalyptic scavengers. Summer immediately agrees. Rick's clearly got an ulterior motive involving that rock, but he's also enabling Summer's worst coping mechanisms, because stopping to deal with feelings would require emotional availability Rick doesn't have. Summer and Hemorrhage's relationship develops during wasteland adventures. There's a genuinely vulnerable moment where Hemorrhage looks at an old billboard showing a child and says, I think I was a child before the boom booms. I think I looked like this. Summer's response, wanna piss on it? Is peak emotional support, wasteland style, and Hemorrhage appreciates it. Get out of my head. The real relationship development happens during car repair. Hemorrhage is fixing an engine, frustrated, and they have this moment reaching for the same wrench. Summer asks to see his face. Hemorrhage, no one has seen my true face and lived. Summer, well, I'm not afraid to die, and I don't care what you look like. He reveals he's a blonde guy with a mustache, which leads to Hemorrhage's existential crisis monologue about identity. I can shave it, Hemorrhage says, spiraling. I'm just thinking, well, why not get rid of this? You just kill everyone that sees it, and it's hot under here, which, by the way, is why I shaved the beard part. So, right there, I'm making a decision based on vanity, which is what I was trying to avoid with the whole bucket over the head, because who am I, and why am I grooming myself? He continues about trying to avoid being fake while being fundamentally fake, and how he hated other performatively tough guys while being the same thing. I'm just a fake mess, and there's no escaping it because Summer kisses him mid-spiral. That's the moment, Hemorrhage being vulnerable about struggling with identity, performing toughness while feeling fake inside, and Summer accepting all of it without judgment. They make out on a table. A man on a leash crawls in for a coffee run, sees them, and politely crawls back out. It's weirdly sweet, despite the cannibalism happening in the background. Meanwhile, Rick's executing his plan. He befriends the Deathstalkers by showing them the isotope can power vehicles. Hemorrhage asks Rick to stay and show them more. Rick agrees. You don't have to ask me twice. Home is nuts right now. My daughter's going through a divorce, and I am not dealing with it in a healthy way at all. That line is crucial. Rick admits he's not dealing with Beth's divorce healthily, which means his plan for Summer isn't about healthy coping either. 3 weeks pass, marked by a title card. The Deathstalker camp has transformed into suburbs with electricity, wired houses, lawns, driveways. Eli's mowing grass. Summer comes home from scavenging, still dressed in armor, carrying a grocery bag of human limbs. She's the only Deathstalker still committed to the old lifestyle. Inside, Rick, Morty, and Hemorrhage are watching Blood Dome playoffs on TV. Hemorrhage is wearing a Big Johnson t-shirt and navy pants. He's completely domesticated. The fight happens fast. Summer, you haven't moved since I left to scavenge this morning. Hemorrhage, Blood Dome playoffs. Summer explodes. Oh, there's the nihilistic brute I married. Except now, life only means nothing when I'm talking to him, and everything means everything when it's on fucking TV. Hemorrhage, Jesus Christ, when did you become a monster? Summer's response is perfect. I was a monster when you met me. We were monsters. We didn't care about anything. Rick admits his plan to Morty explicitly. Come on, Morty. No union built on running from your problems lasts more than 5 years. 7 tops. Grandpa just sped things up with a few creature comforts of modern society. Rick engineered the breakup deliberately by introducing suburban normalcy to expose that the relationship was escapism. But here's where the theory pushes back. Was Rick right? Hemorrhage's vulnerability during the helmet scene was real. His struggle with authenticity, his admission of feeling fake while trying to be genuine, his willingness to be vulnerable with Summer, that's more emotional honesty than we see from most Rick and Morty relationships. When Summer claims family means nothing, Hemorrhage says, this family does matter. He opens up about his past, his insecurities, his identity struggles. Summer accepted that. She kissed him mid-spiral, saying, without words, you don't have to figure yourself out for me to want you. That's actually healthy relationship behavior, accepting your partner's uncertainty and loving them through identity struggles. The fact that this happened between two post-apocalyptic cannibals doesn't make the emotional intimacy less real. The theory's darkest claim is that Rick destroyed this relationship because he couldn't stand seeing Summer happy with someone who wasn't him. Rick could have just grabbed Summer and Morty and left. Instead, he spent 3 weeks transforming an entire post-apocalyptic society, fundamentally altering Deathstalker culture, just to prove Summer's relationship was built on escapism. That's not helping Summer process divorce. That's destroying everything Summer built independent of Rick. Rick turned radioactive cannibals into suburbanites, gave them modern technology, changed their entire civilization, just to make Summer's boyfriend boring. That's the actions of someone who needs Summer dependent on him. Rick admits multiple times he's not dealing with the divorce healthily, using Summer's escapism as excuse to enable his own, while simultaneously controlling her choices. But the transcript shows this relationship, no matter how genuine, the emotional connection was built on violence, cannibalism, and mutual nihilism. Hemorrhage participated in slavery, murder, and eating people. Summer was using the relationship to avoid processing her parents' divorce. Rick's manipulation was real and controlling, but the relationship he destroyed wasn't healthy just because it had moments of emotional vulnerability. It was Summer's most escapist relationship, dressed up with genuine feelings that made it harder to see they were both running from reality into wasteland violence. Alright, let's get into another theory that'll give you chills. If this kind of content's your thing, go ahead and subscribe for more. M. Night Shame Aliens is the episode where Rick and Morty get trapped in a simulation, escape it, discover they're in another simulation, escape that one, realize they're in a third simulation, escape that too, and then Rick blows up the Zagarian spacecraft with fake concentrated dark matter formula before heading home. Except here's the fun part. The episode ends with Rick drunk in Morty's bedroom at 3 a.m., holding a knife to his grandson's throat, screaming, "Are you a simulation?" That's not the behavior of someone who's confident they escaped. That's the behavior of someone who knows they might still be trapped and is desperately testing reality by threatening to stab a 14-year-old. The theory suggests Rick never actually escaped the Zagarian simulation. The escape was just another layer designed to make Rick think he won. And every episode since then has been the Zagarians studying Rick in increasingly elaborate scenarios. Rick's confidence that he escaped is exactly what keeps him trapped, because the best prison is one where the prisoner thinks they're free. In M. Night Shame Aliens, Season 1, Episode 4, Rick immediately knows something's wrong with reality. Morty comments on how beautiful the day is, and Rick responds sarcastically, "Oh yes, Morty. It's almost unbelievable, isn't it?" Beth acts robotic. "I'm going to work." Morty, "Good morning." Dad, "Good morning. I am going to work. Goodbye." Rick's mocking the simulation's lazy programming. "So, you're saying that she's acting weird? How sophisticated. Careful, guys. You're gonna burn out the CPU with this one." The Zagarians are the galaxy's most ambitious, least successful con artists, trying to scam Rick's concentrated dark matter formula. They put Rick in a simulation of his normal life, but Rick spots the sloppy details immediately. A guy putting a bun between two hot dogs, someone walking a cat on a leash, which Morty points out, misses. Spencer does all the time, but Rick insists she's an idiot, and most obviously a Pop-Tart living in a toaster house and driving a toaster car. Rick's criticism is perfect. Why would he drive a smaller toaster with wheels? I mean, does your car look like a smaller version of your house? No. Rick figures out they want his concentrated dark matter formula when a fake ambulance shows up. "We got the President of the United States in here. We need 10 cc of concentrated dark matter, stat, or he'll die." Rick slams the doors shut and explains to Morty, "These Zagarians are always trying to scam me out of my secrets, but they made a big mistake this time, Morty. They dragged you into this. Now they're gonna pay." Rick decides to scam the scammers by performing a fake rap concert called The Recipe for Concentrated Dark Matter that overloads the simulation's processing power with ridiculous commands. Everybody over 30, do this with your hands. Everybody with a red shirt, jump up and down. Then the real chaos. Yo, everyone whose first name begins with an L who isn't Hispanic, walk in a circle the same number of times as the square root of your age, times 10. The simulation freezes. Rick and Morty run to the edge of the virtual world and jump off into the spacecraft. Here's where it gets nested. Rick and Morty collect processor chips from the spacecraft's central processing room, steal an escape pod, and fly away. Rick's celebrating, and once again, I'm flying away with everything I can carry, and the Zagarians got nothing of mine. They land at home. Rick tries to enter his garage code, and suddenly, everything vanishes. Prince Nebulon appears. Well, what's this? Because it looks like you're inside a simulation. Inside a simulation. You're still on the ship. Game day bucket go boom. Prince Nebulon reveals, we've known how to make concentrated dark matter for a long time, but now we also know the code to your fabled safe, Rick Sanchez. Rick points out the obvious flaw. Yeah, until I get home before you and change the combination. You bunch of idiots. So, Prince Nebulon declares, that is why you're never getting home. Rick and Morty run through the spacecraft again, using Morty's nudity as defense, because Zagarians are really uncomfortable with nudity. Accidentally run into Jerry, who's been living in his own simulation sector this whole time, having the best day of his life, and all three escape on a stolen ship. The Zagarians chase them. Morty freezes up when Rick asks him to make concentrated dark matter because there's no time, and the simulation breaks down again. Prince Nebulon appears laughing. Oh my god, Rick, how dumb are you? You're inside a simulation of a simulation inside another giant simulation. We never had the recipe for concentrated dark matter. But we do now. We do now, sucka. Rick's furious. They simulated my grandson's genitalia, which Kevin from the Zagarian crew fought real hard to supervise. Prince Nebulon takes a selfie with defeated Rick and lets them leave. In the shuttle home, Rick gives Jerry fake concentrated dark matter instructions, knowing the Zagarians will use them. The formula causes the Zagarian spacecraft to explode. Rick sings Baker Street while Jerry watches the explosion in shock. They're home. Jerry pitches hungry for apples to his real boss and gets fired. Everything's back to normal, except the final scene. Rick shows up drunk in Morty's bedroom in the middle of the night. Hey little buddy, how you doing in here right now? Morty's confused. Rick gets sentimental. You're a good kid, Morty. You're a real little character, Morty. I had a really rocky day today, Morty. You're my little friend, aren't you? Then Rick suddenly grabs a knife and holds it to Morty's throat. You little son of a bitch. Are you a simulation? Huh? Are you a simulation? Morty's terrified. No. Rick lowers the knife. I'm sorry, Morty. You're a good kid, Morty. Then Rick passes out on Morty's floor. Morty's traumatized. What the hell? What a life. That ending is the theory's strongest evidence. Rick just escaped 3 nested simulations, blew up the Zagarian ship, confirmed he's home, but he's so paranoid he's threatening to stab Morty to test if reality's real. That's not confidence. That's someone who knows they might still be trapped and is desperately trying to verify reality through violence. If Rick genuinely believed he escaped, he wouldn't be drunk at 3 a.m. holding knives to family members, asking if they're simulations. The episode establishes that nested simulations are possible. Simulation within simulation within simulation. Prince Nebulon successfully fooled Rick 3 times. Each escape felt real until Rick discovered the next layer. The pattern: Rick thinks he escaped, celebrates victory, then realizes he's still trapped. What if that pattern continued one more time, except Rick never discovered the final layer? The theory suggests Rick's escape and the Zygarion ship exploding was the 4th simulation layer, perfectly designed to make Rick think he won. The Zagarians needed Rick to believe he escaped so he'd stop looking for exit signs. The best way to trap someone is make them think they're free. Rick's drunk paranoia at the end suggests some part of him knows this. He escaped too easily. The explosion was too convenient. Something feels wrong, but he can't prove it. If Rick's still in a simulation, every episode since M. Night Shyamalan's is the Zagarians studying Rick in increasingly elaborate scenarios. They're not trying to steal concentrated dark matter anymore. They already got that formula, or think they did. Now they're studying Rick's decision-making, his relationships, his emotional responses, his scientific process. Each adventure is a controlled experiment. Each family interaction is monitored data. The Zagarians are building a complete psychological profile of Rick Sanchez by watching him live in a simulation so sophisticated he can't detect it. The implications are disturbing. Every character Rick's met since episode 4 could be a simulation. Unity, Bird Person, Evil Morty, Rick Prime, BS, all potentially Zagarian constructs designed to study Rick's responses. Every emotional breakthrough Rick has is being recorded and analyzed. His suicide attempt in autoerotic assimilation, data about Rick's depressive triggers, his backstory with Diane, information the Zagarians extracted from his brain to make the simulation more convincing, his relationship with Morty, a study in Rick's capacity for attachment despite nihilism. The theory explains why Rick seems paranoid about being controlled or watched. He is being controlled and watched. He just can't prove it anymore. The Zagarians learned from their mistakes. No more sloppy details like Pop-Tarts and toasters. No more simulation freezes from processing overload. They're running Rick's life on maximum capacity now, rendering every detail perfectly, making sure nothing breaks immersion. Rick suspects he's still trapped but has no evidence, so he just drinks more and acts like he's free, while some part of him knows he's still in the box. The darkest part? If this theory's true, Rick's nihilism makes perfect sense. Nothing matters because nothing's real. Rick figured out he's in a simulation but can't prove it or escape it, so he just gave up and decided to enjoy the ride while waiting to die. His catchphrase, "Wubba lubba dub dub," means, "I am in great pain, please help me." That's a man screaming for rescue from a simulation he knows he's trapped in, but can't escape. Every adventure is Rick desperately testing reality's boundaries, looking for glitches, trying to find the edge like he did in the Zagarian ship, but this simulation's too good. It never breaks. Rick's knife to Morty's throat wasn't drunken paranoia. It was Rick desperately testing if Morty's really Morty, or just ones and zeros. The fact that Rick apologized and passed out doesn't mean he's satisfied with the answer. It means he's given up trying to tell the difference. Okay, things get even darker with this next one. Big Trouble in Little Sanchez ends with Rick returning from being Tiny Rick, immediately checking a device, and declaring, "Operation Phoenix is not the fallback I thought it would be. I guess it's back to the drawing board." Minutes later, he warns his family there's a bunch of dead mez in the garage. The episode treats this as a throwaway joke. Haha, classic Rick. Multiple corpses in the garage. How quirky. Except Operation Phoenix is Rick's immortality backup system, designed to respawn him in a clone body if he dies. The theory suggests Operation Phoenix doesn't preserve consciousness at all. It creates a new Rick, with the original's memories, meaning every time Rick respawns, the original Rick actually dies permanently. A clone wakes up believing it's the same person, but it's just the latest copy in a chain of dead Ricks who each thought they'd live forever. Rick discovered his immortality system is actually a suicide and replacement program, and the dead mez in the garage aren't failed experiments. They're proof that every Rick death is real, final, and unreversible, with each new Rick just another copy, pretending to be the original. In Big Trouble in Little Sanchez, Season 2, Episode 7, Rick transfers his consciousness into a teenage clone body to help Summer and Morty hunt a vampire at their high school. The teenage brain chemistry suppresses Rick's depression and nihilism, turning him into Tiny Rick, an insufferable popular teenager who loves high school and refuses to return to his old body. Summer and Morty eventually force Rick out of Tiny Rick by making him listen to Elliott Smith until the existential dread breaks through the teenage optimism, allowing old Rick's consciousness to reassert control and transfer back. Rick escapes the Tiny Rick body successfully, returning to his original elderly form. He's naked, disoriented, telling everyone to stop looking at him and put pants on. Then Rick says something nobody in the room understands the significance of. Holy shit. Thanks, kids. You figured it out. Well, Summer did. Kind of weird that you were that willing to sell my existence out for some trim, Morty. Rick's thanking them for saving him, acknowledging Summer solved the problem, making a joke about Morty prioritizing Jessica over Rick's well-being. Standard Rick banter. Then Rick continues, "But listen, I forgive you both, because you know what? I learned today. Something important. The teenage mind is its own worst enemy. Oh, I also learned this." Rick pulls out a device. It beeps. Rick stares at it with an expression the transcript doesn't describe, but the audience can imagine. Rick realizing something terrible. Operation Phoenix is not the fallback I thought it would be. I guess it's back to the drawing board. That's the moment. Rick checks his immortality backup system and realizes it's fundamentally broken, not malfunctioning. Fundamentally broken in terms of how it operates versus what Rick thought it did. The family doesn't understand what Rick's talking about. They're too busy yelling at him to put pants on, and Rick doesn't explain. He just files away this horrifying realization and moves on with his day, like he didn't just discover something philosophically devastating about his own existence. Later, Rick picks up Beth and Jerry from couples therapy. Jerry's traumatized, Beth's processing, and Rick casually mentions, just so you're prepared, there's a bunch of dead mez in the garage. Jerry responds, sounds like our stories were connected by a theme. Rick immediately shuts that down. Not really, Jerry. Probably a cosmetic connection, your mind mistakes for thematic. Multiple dead Ricks in the garage. Rick discovered Operation Phoenix doesn't work as intended. These facts are connected, but the episode doesn't explicitly explain how. The theory fills in that gap. Operation Phoenix spawned multiple Rick copies while Rick was in the tiny Rick body, and they all died, proving the system doesn't preserve consciousness, it just creates replacements. Here's how Operation Phoenix likely works. Rick sets up a system that monitors his vital signs continuously. If Rick dies, the system activates, creating a clone body and downloading Rick's most recent brain scan into it. New Rick wakes up with all of old Rick's memories, up to the last backup point, believes he's the same Rick who died, and continues living. From outside perspectives, Rick survived. From New Rick's perspective, he survived. But the original Rick, that consciousness ended. It died. It's gone. The philosophical problem is identical to Star Trek's transporter dilemma. When someone gets transported, are they disassembled and reassembled, maintaining consciousness continuity, or are they destroyed and a copy created at the destination who thinks they're the original? The transporter question has been debated for decades. Operation Phoenix faces the same issue. Does consciousness transfer preserve the original, or does it create a copy who inherits memories but isn't actually the same person? Rick discovering a bunch of dead mez suggests Operation Phoenix glitched while Rick's consciousness was in the tiny Rick body. Maybe the system detected Rick's original body as dead because Rick wasn't mentally inhabiting it, spawned replacement Ricks. But those replacements couldn't activate because Rick's consciousness was elsewhere. Or maybe the system tried spawning Rick multiple times while his consciousness transferred between bodies, creating several failed copies. Either way, Rick returned to his original body and found evidence that Operation Phoenix creates new Ricks rather than preserving the original Rick. That's why Rick says it's not the fallback I thought it would be. Rick thought Operation Phoenix was immortality, die, respawn, continue existing as yourself. Instead, Rick discovered its replacement, die. Someone else with your memories wakes up thinking they're you, but you ended. That's not survival. That's death with a replacement that doesn't know it's a replacement. The horror deepens when you consider Rick's likely used Operation Phoenix before. Rick's died multiple times across the series, blown up, shot, poisoned, atomized. If Operation Phoenix was Rick's backup system before this episode revealed its flaw, how many times has Rick already died permanently? How many times has a new Rick woken up believing he survived when actually the previous Rick ended and a copy began? Current Rick might be the 5th Rick, or the 20th, or the 100th. Each previous Rick died genuinely, finally, with their consciousness ending. Each new Rick woke up with continuous memories, believing they were the same Rick, never knowing they're a replacement. The original Rick, the one who invented portal travel, who lost Diane and Beth, who went on the murder spree, might have died decades ago. Current Rick might be a copy of a copy of a copy, each iteration believing it's the original, while actually being the latest link in a chain of corpses. This explains Rick's nihilism differently than any previous theory. Rick doesn't believe nothing matters, because the universe is infinite and meaningless. Rick believes nothing matters because he might not be real. Every memory Rick has of his life might be implanted. Every experience might belong to a different Rick who died. The Rick reading this sentence might be a day old, a week old, a month old, with decades of false memories of being Rick Sanchez, but actually being a fresh copy who just booted up. Rick can't verify his own continuity. There's no test to determine if you're the original consciousness or a copy with inherited memories. If you're a copy, you'll believe you're the original because you have all their memories. You'll remember being younger, remember yesterday, remember your entire life. But those could all be downloaded experiences that never happened to your consciousness specifically. You could be seconds old with decades of fake history. That's what Rick discovered checking Operation Phoenix. He learned his immortality system doesn't preserve him, it replaces him. Every time Rick dies, Rick actually dies, and someone else inherits his life. That someone believes they're Rick, acts like Rick, has Rick's memories, but they're not the Rick who died. They're Rick 2, or Rick 47, or Rick 318, to another copy, in an endless chain of deaths, disguised as survival. The dead mez in the garage are physical proof. Rick can see his own corpses, multiple bodies that each thought they were the real Rick, each believing they'd achieved immortality through Operation Phoenix, each dying anyway while a replacement booted up somewhere else. Those dead Ricks aren't failed experiments. They're evidence that the experiment fundamentally cannot work because consciousness doesn't transfer, it only copies. Rick says it's back to the drawing board, meaning he needs to design a better immortality system. But can consciousness transfer work at all? Is there any technology that preserves the original you versus creating a copy? Or is every form of consciousness uploading, body swapping, or respawning just elaborate suicide with replacement? Rick might have realized there's no solution. Death is final, immortality is impossible, and his backup system just ensures someone with his memories continues existing after he personally ends. This reframes every dangerous thing Rick does. Every adventure where Rick risks death, every time he's cavalier about getting shot or blown up, he's gambling with permanent obliteration. If Rick dies, a replacement wakes up believing it survived, but this Rick, the one currently alive, ends forever. The replacement won't know the difference, but current Rick will be dead. Actually dead. Finally dead. Rick's alcoholism takes on darker meaning. Maybe Rick drinks to cope with knowing he might be a copy. Maybe Rick's self-destructive because he's aware death is final despite the immortality system. Maybe Rick doesn't care about dying because he's concluded he might not be the original Rick anyway. If he's already a copy, dying just creates another copy, and copies of copies don't matter. The theory's darkest implication: Rick might be killing himself deliberately to test if consciousness continues. Each death would create a new Rick who remembers the previous Rick's life, allowing Rick to gather data about whether subjective experience survives transfer. But that data only tells you a Rick woke up, not the same, Rick continued. The experiment can never confirm consciousness preservation, only that replacements function identically to originals. Rick discovered something horrifying in Big Trouble in Little Sanchez. His immortality system is a lie. Every Rick who dies believing they'll respawn is permanently erased, replaced by a copy who never knows they're a replacement. Rick's backup isn't survival, it's extinction, with cosmetic continuity. And Rick can't tell anyone, can't explain, can't seek help, because admitting this means admitting every Rick could be days old with false memories, and there's no way to prove otherwise. So Rick just mentions the dead bodies casually, tells his family it's probably nothing important, and continues living with the knowledge that next time he dies, and there will be a next time, he'll genuinely end, and someone else will wear his face and call themselves Rick Sanchez without ever knowing they're the latest copy in an infinite chain of deaths disguised as immortality. Now we're exploring the next dark theory. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're first to catch the next theory. The Ricks Must Be Crazy presents Rick's car battery as a fun sci-fi concept. Haha, Grandpa enslaved an entire civilization to power his vehicle. Classic Rick move. Except the episode shows something way darker than the jokes suggest. These people have no idea they're slaves. They think they're advancing as a society, building a better future. But every technological achievement just makes them better batteries. When Zeep discovers the truth and confronts Rick, Rick's response is basically, yeah, and? Because even knowing you're enslaved doesn't free you. Zeep has to keep his civilization generating power, or Rick destroys them all. The theory suggests Rick's done this to multiple civilizations for different devices, meaning there could be dozens or hundreds of enslaved universes powering Rick's phone, his ship, his portal gun, each one containing billions of people who'll never escape, and whose entire reality exists only to generate electricity for Rick's convenience. And when Rick upgrades his tech or gets a new car, what happens to the old battery universes? Do they just get thrown away, left in a junkyard dimension to slowly die out, wondering why their god abandoned them? In The Ricks Must Be Crazy, Season 2, Episode 6, Rick's car won't start after seeing a Ballfondlers movie. Morty asks if it's the quantum carburetor, and Rick shuts him down immediately. Quantum carburetor? Jesus, Morty, you can't just add a sci-fi word to a car word and hope it means something. Rick diagnoses the problem. It looks like something's wrong with the microverse battery. We're going to have to go inside. Morty's confused. Go inside what? Rick clarifies. The battery, Morty. Inside the battery is an entire planet with billions of people, cities, governments, media, civilization. Rick explains casually, I put a spatially tessellated void inside a modified temporal field until a planet developed intelligent life. I then introduced that life to the wonders of electricity, which they now generate on a global scale. And, some of it goes to power my engine and charge my phone and stuff. Morty's horrified. You have a whole planet sitting around making your power for you? That's slavery. Rick's response is the key line. It's society. They work for each other, Morty. They pay each other. They buy houses. They get married and make children that replace them when they get too old to make power. Morty points out the obvious. That just sounds like slavery with extra steps. Rick dismisses this with, ooh la la, someone's gonna get laid in college, treating Morty's ethical concern as naive college kid philosophy rather than legitimate horror at what Rick's done. The planet's news anchor explains how their world works. The alien known as Rick once gave our world the gift of Google Box technology, which, when stomped on, generates electricity, powering our homes and businesses, improving our daily lives, while safely removing the dangerous waste power to a special disposal volcano. They think they're an advanced civilization with clean energy technology gifted by a benevolent alien. They have no idea the waste power going to the disposal volcano is actually the electricity powering Rick's car. Their entire energy infrastructure is a lie, designed to make them willing participants in their own enslavement. Rick tells Morty to put on antennae. These people need to think we're aliens. The deception is fundamental to the system working. If they knew the truth, they might rebel or refuse to generate power. So Rick maintains the fiction that he's a helpful alien bringing them technology, when actually he's a slave master who built their entire civilization to serve his needs. The people have a holiday called Rick's Giving and teach kids about Rick in school, worshipping their enslaver as a hero. Zeep Zanflorp, described as our most brilliant scientist, has developed new technology that threatens Rick's battery, a source of energy that makes Google boxes obsolete. Rick's worried because if they don't need Google boxes, they stop generating power for his car. Zeep's invention is a miniverse, another universe inside a container where another civilization cranks, Flubel cranks, to generate power, 80% of which gets channeled out to Zeep's civilization. Here's where the horror gets nested. Zeep created slaves to free his people from slavery they don't know they're experiencing, meaning Zeep's simultaneously a slave to Rick and a slave master to his miniverse. Zeep's completely oblivious to the hypocrisy until Rick forces him to confront it. Rick points out Zeep's universe is unethical, and Zeep uses Rick's exact words back at him. No, no, no. They work for each other in exchange for money, which they then... Rick cuts him off. Well, that just sounds like slavery with extra steps. The miniverse contains a scientist named Kyle working on a teenyverse with Bluebell Yanks, a third level of nested slavery. Kyle's creating slaves while being a slave in a universe run by a slave. Nobody knows they're enslaved until someone shows them the next level up. It's slavery turtles all the way down, each layer thinking they're free while powering the layer above. When Kyle reveals his teenyverse technology, Zeep has a breakdown. This is wrong, Kyle. What you're doing is wrong. This is slavery. You're talking about creating a planet of slaves. Rick points out Zeep's hypocrisy. Told you, Zeep. Then Zeep realizes the full implication. Wait a minute. Did you create my universe? Is my universe a miniverse? Rick confirms it. Microverse. Rick still arguing about terminology even during Zeep's existential crisis, which is peak Rick energy. Zeep processes that his entire reality, his civilization's history, every person he's ever known, all of it exists inside Rick's car battery. Kyle asks, are they not really aliens? Morty confirms, nah, they're just a couple of crazy, wacky scientists. Kyle has his own breakdown. So he made a universe, and that guy is from that universe. And that guy made a universe. And that's the universe where I was born, where my father died, where I couldn't make time for his funeral because I was working on my universe. Kyle missed his father's funeral to build slaves, while being a slave himself, and only now realizes none of it matters because his entire existence is just a battery for someone else's battery. The nested horror continues when Kyle activates his teenyverse, and they all get stuck on the prehistoric planet inside. Rick and Zeep fight, both trying to kill the other to protect their respective universes. Zeep threatens, when I get out of this teenyverse, I'm gonna smash it to pieces with you in it. Rick responds, yeah, well, when I get out of this teenyverse, I'm gonna get out of the surrounding miniverse and then the microverse around that. And guess what? Morty tries to de-escalate. Don't make things worse, Rick. He's not gonna destroy your universe. We need it to start our car. Zeep's devastated. That's what you used my universe for? To run your car? Rick's completely unbothered. Yeah, but don't flatter yourself. There's always AAA, you fucking cocksucker. That exchange reveals Rick's true attitude. Zeep's entire civilization, billions of people, their history and culture and achievements, all replaceable. Rick could just call roadside assistance instead. The universe containing Zeep's entire reality is worth less to Rick than a tow truck. Zeep's universe is so meaningless to Rick that he'd rather destroy it and walk than admit Zeep has value. Eventually, Morty forces them to cooperate by threatening to leave them stranded on the prehistoric planet forever. They build a device to escape, temporarily bonding over science. Zeep even offers to buy Rick drinks. But when they return to Zeep's world, Zeep immediately tries to betray Rick by running to his ship to destroy Kyle's Teenyverse, which would trap Rick inside Zeep's miniverse permanently. Rick catches Zeep at the last moment and kills him. The transcript notes Rick kills Zeep while saying, "Happy Ricksgiving, Bijich," using Zeep's own holiday, celebrating Rick against him. Rick then tells Morty, "We did it, Morty. Now let's get out of here and destroy this whole universe." Rick's ready to commit genocide on billions of people because the battery gave him trouble. Morty protests, but Rick just needs the threat of destruction to get the battery working again. The episode ends with the battery powering up Zeep's civilization back to generating electricity for Rick's car. Zeep gives Rick the middle finger. The gesture Rick taught them means peace among worlds, but actually means fuck you. Zeep saying fuck you while still being forced to power Rick's car, showing the ultimate powerlessness of discovering you're enslaved, but being unable to escape. The theory's most disturbing implication: Rick's done this multiple times for different devices. Rick casually mentions the battery powers, my engine, and charge my phone and stuff. What else is powered by enslaved universes? Rick's portal gun needs massive energy. Does it have its own battery universe? His ship? His inventions? Every device Rick owns could contain billions of enslaved people, generating power while thinking they're living normal lives in an advancing civilization. Rick's also done this long enough to have refined the process. He doesn't stumble or hesitate explaining how the microverse works. He's got the speech memorized. The spatially tessellated void inside a modified temporal field technique is practiced, perfected. Rick's created enough universes that it's routine. This isn't Rick's first battery universe. It might not even be his 10th. The nested aspect proves the concept scales infinitely. If Zeep can create a miniverse and Kyle can create a teenyverse, there's no limit to how small you can go. Rick could have microverses inside microverses inside microverses, each layer unaware of the ones above, each thinking they're free while actually enslaved. The whole chain exists solely to power Rick's car, phone, and stuff. The existential horror for these civilizations is that discovery doesn't lead to freedom. Zeep learned the truth, and it changed nothing. He still has to power Rick's car. He can give Rick the finger, can hate Rick, can know with absolute certainty he's enslaved, but he can't stop being enslaved. The alternative is Rick destroys his entire universe. So Zeep goes back to work, powering Rick's brake lights, knowing every scientific advance his people make just turns them into more efficient slaves. What happens when Rick's done with the battery? When the car gets old, or Rick upgrades to a newer model? The episode never addresses this, which makes it darker. Does Rick just throw away the old battery? Does an entire universe get tossed in a junkyard dimension, left to slowly die out as their infrastructure crumbles? Do they notice the energy they generate stops going anywhere? Do they wonder why their god abandoned them? Or does Rick repurpose old batteries? This battery used to power my car, now it charges my phone, meaning a civilization that thought they were free when the car got scrapped actually just got transferred to a different device. Their entire reality moved from one battery compartment to another without anyone knowing. Generations of people living and dying, never knowing their great-great-grandparents powered a vehicle while they power a smartphone. The episode proves Rick's willing to commit genocide to protect his convenience. When the battery stops working efficiently, Rick's immediate response is, let's destroy this whole universe and get a new battery. Rick treats universe ending like changing batteries in a remote. Annoying when they die, but you just get new ones. Billions of people die, countless families erased, civilizations ended, but to Rick, it's just maintenance on his car. The most philosophically disturbing aspect is these people can never escape. They're not trapped on a planet they could theoretically leave via spaceship. They're trapped inside a battery in another universe. Even if they invented portal technology like Rick's, they'd need massive power to open a portal, power that gets siphoned to Rick's car. Any energy they generate that could be used for escape gets automatically harvested. They're in a prison where trying to break out just makes the walls stronger. And they'll never know. That's the crucial part. Rick designed the system so they think they're free, think they're advancing, think they're building a better future for their children. Every generation works hard, so the next generation has it easier, not knowing they're all equally enslaved and will be forever. The slavery is invisible, built into the fundamental structure of their reality, impossible to detect without external revelation. Zeep's fate proves even revelation doesn't help. He knows he's enslaved. He knows Rick created his universe to power a car. He knows everything his civilization achieved was just making them better slaves. And he has to live with that knowledge while continuing to be a slave, forced to cooperate with his own enslavement because the alternative is extinction. That's not freedom. That's torture with awareness. Rick created a system where slavery is invisible, eternal, and escaping just means enslaving someone else. Zeep tried to free his people by creating the miniverse, but that just made him a slave owner while staying a slave. Kyle tried the same thing with the Teeniverse. The system replicates itself infinitely downward, each layer thinking they found freedom while actually perpetuating the chain. Rick's battery is slavery that reproduces itself, spreads like a virus, turns victims into victimizers who don't even know they're both. That's the theory's darkest truth. Rick discovered how to make slavery self-sustaining and infinitely scalable, packaged it into a car battery, and uses it to charge his phone, while the enslaved civilizations celebrate him as a hero. And when they stop being useful batteries, Rick throws them away and creates new ones, because that's easier than walking or calling AAA. Let's continue with the next unsettling theory. Star Mort Rick Turn of the Jerry presents a mystery. Rick made a Beth clone but can't remember which is real, except Rick surgically removed the memory from his brain and stored it in a vial. You don't mind wipe yourself over simple confusion. You write a note. You check your files. Removing a memory entirely suggests the information is so psychologically devastating that Rick couldn't function knowing it. The theory suggests what's actually in that vial isn't which Beth is the clone, but something darker. Both Beths are clones. The original Beth is dead, killed by Rick, possibly accidentally, or lost during an adventure. And Rick created 2 replacement daughters because he couldn't handle losing another family member after Diane. One Beth for his domestic fantasy of being a present father, one for his adventure fantasy of having a space-exploring partner. When Rick looks at the vial at episode's end and says, "Holy shit, I'm a terrible father," that's not the reaction to forgetting which daughter is which. That's remembering you murdered your child and replaced her with duplicates who don't know they're both fake. In Star Mort Rick Turn of the Jerry, Season 4 finale, Space Beth returns and immediately suspects Rick put a bomb in her neck. She's right. Rick admits, "I put a bomb in her neck in case she ever came back." That's bizarre insurance for your actual daughter. Why would Rick install a device to vaporize Beth if she shows up? Rick's explanation, she wasn't supposed to come back. But if Space Beth is the clone sent away for adventures, why the bomb? If Earth Beth is the clone, why not just tell Space Beth the truth? The bomb makes sense, only if both are clones, and Rick needed insurance in case one discovered the truth and threatened to expose it. When the 2 Beths meet, both reveal Rick told each of them the other is the clone. That's not confusion, that's deliberate psychological torture. Rick's making both daughters doubt their reality simultaneously. Why would Rick do this unless he's hiding something worse than a mix-up? Rick reveals the memory vial, the memory of which Beth is real and which Beth is a clone, obviously. Note the phrasing. He doesn't say which is which. He says the vial contains information about which Beth is real and which Beth is a clone. That phrasing doesn't confirm one is real. Both Beths reject knowing. I don't care what's in that vial. Yeah, me neither. You're a piece of shit either way. Rick tries getting Summer and Morty to care, but both decline. We have 2 badass moms now. Then Beth forces Rick's hand. I want you to decide, Dad. Do you want me to stay here and be part of your life, or do you want me to leave? Rick doesn't answer verbally. He does a shell game gesture with cups, turns off his projector, looks at the vial, and says, "Holy shit, I'm a terrible father." That reaction is too strong for, "Oops, I forgot which Beth is which." Rick's looking at information that triggers existential horror about his parenting. The theory suggests the vial contains, both are clones. Original Beth died, date. You created 2 replacements and mind-wiped yourself to avoid guilt. The evidence stacks up. First, the timeline doesn't work. Rick claims he made the clone because Beth didn't want space adventures. But when? Beth's been married to Jerry for 16 plus years. Did Rick make the clone before the marriage? During? If after? Did Jerry never notice his wife got replaced? The vagueness suggests Rick's hiding when and why the clones were made. Second, both Beths have identical memories, mannerisms, and psychological damage from Rick. If one is a clone made later in life, she should have memory gaps or differences. Both reference the same childhood, same trauma, same everything until one went to space. That perfect duplication suggests both were made simultaneously from the same template, original Beth's memories at the moment of death, uploaded into 2 fresh bodies. Third, Rick's comment that Space Beth wasn't supposed to come back reveals the plan required separation. If both stayed on Earth, they'd eventually meet and figure something out. One leaving permanently maintains the illusion. Each Beth thinks the other is the clone living an alternate life. Neither realizes both are clones of a dead woman. The theory suggests what happened. Original Beth died during an adventure Rick took her on, or Rick accidentally killed her during a fight, or she died defending Rick from consequences of his actions. Rick, already destroyed by losing Diane, couldn't handle losing Beth too. So he took Beth's most recent memory backup and created two bodies, one to stay on Earth, fulfilling Rick's fantasy of being a present father, one to go to space, fulfilling his fantasy of having an adventure partner. Rick gets both versions of his daughter without choosing. Rick mind-wiped himself because living with the knowledge he killed his daughter and replaced her with duplicates was unbearable. The mind wipe lets Rick interact with both Beths, as if they're real, without guilt destroying him. The bomb ensures if Space Beth discovers the truth, Rick can eliminate her remotely and tell Earth Beth the clone went rogue. Each Beth thinks the other is fake. Neither realizes both are. When Beth demands Rick choose, Rick looks at the vial and sees the truth. Both are clones. Original Beth is dead, and he's been living a lie where he gets both versions of his dead daughter without grieving properly. Holy shit. I'm a terrible father. Makes sense now. Not terrible for forgetting which is which, but terrible for killing his daughter and replacing her with duplicates who don't know they're both fake. The episode never reveals what's in the vial, which is suspicious. If it's just Space Beth is clone or Earth Beth is clone, why not show it? The ambiguity serves Rick. As long as nobody knows, both Beths continue living as potentially real, and Rick avoids consequences. If the vial shows both are clones, original Beth died, then revealing that destroys both Beth's identities and exposes Rick's deepest betrayal. Both Beths decided not knowing is better than potential pain of discovery, which protects Rick, not them. Every memory they have of childhood is uploaded programming. Every feeling about Rick is manufactured from original Beth's template. Their copies frozen at Beth's developmental stage when she died. Earth, Beth married Jerry because that's what original Beth was doing when she died. Space Beth rebels because that's what original Beth wanted when she died. Neither can escape the programming because they're not people making choices. They're copies following patterns of someone who no longer exists. And Rick's forcing them to compete for affection while neither realizes they're both equally fake. Not choosing between daughters, but choosing between fantasies about a daughter he killed and can't admit he lost. Now, brace yourself for the next disturbing theory. Total Rickall introduces parasites that multiply by implanting fake positive memories. Morty discovers the solution. Parasites can only create pleasant memories, so anyone you remember fondly might be fake. The only way to verify someone's real is remembering times they hurt you. The episode plays this for laughs, but the implication is devastating. The Smith family's relationships are so toxic that genuine affection has become indistinguishable from parasitic manipulation. They've normalized abuse to the point where mutual harm is the only verification method for reality. Beth proves this by shooting Mr. Poopy Butthole specifically because he was too nice. The theory suggests healthy relationships are literally impossible in the Smith household. Radius. The moment someone stops being abusive, the family would suspect they're a parasite and kill them. In Total Rickall, Season 2, Episode 4, the family discovers their house is infested with parasites that embed themselves in memories to multiply. Rick shoots Uncle Steve, who everyone remembers as Jerry's brother, revealing he's actually an alien that uses fake memories to spread. Rick seals the house with blast shields, but more characters keep appearing with memories of always being there. Cousin Nicky, Mr. Beauregard, the butler, Frankenstein, Sleepy Gary, who both Beth and Jerry romantically remember, photography, Raptor, Pencil Vester, and dozens more. Each parasite creates elaborate flashbacks, making everyone believe they're real family. The family starts suspecting each other. Rick tries shooting Summer, convinced she's fake. The situation escalates until Rick's surrounded by characters he can't verify, some trying to convince him he's the parasite. Morty confronts Rick in the garage with a gun, demanding Rick open the shields or die. Rick explodes, telling Morty he has about 1,000 memories of him and only 6 are pleasant, then dares Morty to shoot. Morty shoots, but not Rick. He shoots Baby Wizard, standing nearby. Baby Wizard transforms into a parasite. Then Morty shoots Duck with muscles. Both were parasites. Morty explains, "I figured it out, Rick. The parasites can only create pleasant memories. I know you're real because I have a ton of bad memories with you." The transcript shows flashbacks of Rick traumatizing Morty, times Rick abandoned him, endangered him, left him in despair. These horrible memories prove Rick's real. The solution is remembering abuse, and abuse becomes proof of authenticity. This triggers a massacre. The family systematically kills everyone they remember only fondly. The verification process continues through explicit scenes of family members proving each other's reality through remembered abuse. Summer proves Morty's real by flashing back to kicking him in the crotch, unprovoked. Morty screams and falls over. Present Summer says Morty's her bitch of a sister, confirming he's real. Morty proves Summer's real by remembering when Summer found Beth drunk on the bed with a wine bottle on picture day. Beth accidentally hit Summer in the face with the bottle while trying to get up. Summer screamed about having a bruise for picture day. Present Summer confirms Beth's real by calling her the lady who got pregnant too early and constantly makes it their problem. Beth proves Jerry's real by remembering when they ran from a homeless man and Jerry locked himself in the car, leaving Beth outside, trying to get in, while Jerry yelled at her to just run. Present Beth confirms Jerry's real, and Jerry cries asking if he's a parasite. Being fake would be better than being the real Jerry, who abandons his wife to danger. The episode's logic creates a disturbing equation. Pleasant memories equal fake, painful memories equal real. This means healthy relationships are literally impossible in the Smith household. If someone starts treating you well consistently, you'd suspect they're a parasite. The moment abuse stops, authenticity becomes questionable. The proof comes with Mr. Poopy Butthole. He survives the entire episode as a real character, participates in hunting parasites, and makes it to the end. They sit down for dinner, and Mr. Poopy Butthole asks someone to pass the pork chop. Beth shoots him. Mr. Poopy Butthole flies into the wall, bleeding and screaming, asking Beth why she did this. Beth runs to the kitchen crying, spilling wine everywhere. Beth shot Mr. Poopy Butthole specifically because she had no bad memories of him. He was genuinely supportive, genuinely there for her. That made him suspicious. In the Smith family, consistent kindness equals potential threat. Beth's instinct, when faced with someone who's only been good to her, is murder. The post-credits scene shows Mr. Poopy Butthole recovering months later in physical therapy. Beth asks if he can have visitors. The doctor says Mr. Poopy Butthole wants to be alone and told the doctor to tell Beth he's sorry, he didn't have bad memories with them. If they love him, they should leave. Mr. Poopy Butthole apologizes for being too nice. He understands the family's logic. He should have hurt them so they'd know he was real. His consistent kindness almost got him killed. He tells them if they love him, they should leave, because their love is expressed through harm. The episode establishes a family where abuse is the only language of authenticity. Morty proves Summer's real by remembering her unprovoked violence. Summer proves Beth's real by remembering neglect and physical harm. Beth proves Jerry's real by remembering abandonment. They all prove Rick's real by remembering countless instances of trauma. The theory's most disturbing implication: this family cannot have healthy relationships because healthy relationships would be indistinguishable from parasitic manipulation. If Rick suddenly stopped traumatizing Morty, Morty would suspect Rick's a parasite. If Jerry started consistently supporting Beth, she'd wonder if he's been replaced. The family's locked in a cycle where they must continue hurting each other to prove they're real. This explains why the family stays together despite constant dysfunction. They're not staying together because they love each other. They're staying together because mutual abuse is how they verify reality. The family's bound not by affection, but by shared trauma, and that trauma must be constantly renewed, or authenticity becomes questionable. Rick's relationship with Morty makes horrifying sense now. Rick having 1,000 memories of Morty with only 6 being pleasant isn't Rick being a bad grandfather. That's Rick maintaining Morty's reality by ensuring sufficient bad memories. If Rick treated Morty well consistently, Morty might suspect Rick's a parasite. The abuse isn't a side effect of their relationship, it's the foundation. Beth's drunken wine bottle to the face incident proves she's Summer's real mother, not Beth's sacrifices or love, the moment she accidentally injured her daughter on picture day. Summer can't trust Beth's parenting or affection, but she can trust Beth's capacity to harm her. Jerry locking Beth out of the car while she's in danger proves he's her real husband, not their wedding or history, the moment Jerry prioritized his safety over hers. Beth can't trust Jerry's love or promises, but she can trust Jerry's cowardice. The family's created a reality where dysfunction is the only proof of existence. They've normalized abuse so completely that kindness became suspicious. Mr. Poopy Butthole's shooting isn't a tragic mistake, it's the logical conclusion of their worldview. Nice equals fake, harmful equals real. This creates impossible standards for anyone entering the Smith family. You must hurt them to prove you're real, but if you hurt them, you're abusive. The family's created a system where the only winning move is being consistently harmful in ways they've learned to accept as authentic. The episode ends with the family leaving the hospital where Mr. Poopy Butthole's recovering. They're leaving behind the one person who was genuinely kind to them. Understanding his goodness doesn't fit their reality. They return home to continue proving they're real through mutual harm, because that's the only verification method they have. The Smith family can only know they exist by remembering times they hurt each other, meaning their entire identity depends on perpetuating trauma. Love and abuse have become functionally identical, and the moment someone treats you with consistent kindness, you shoot them for being too suspicious. The Ricklantis mix-up shows Rick J. 22 working at the Simple Rick cookie factory, where Simple Rick sits hooked to a machine, playing his happiest memory on loop to flavor cookies. Rick J. 22 rebels, kills his supervisor, takes Simple Rick hostage, and demands a portal gun, 2000 sane. But the gun leads to the blender dimension and kills Simple Rick instantly. Factory owner Rick D. Sanchez III appears, leads Rick J. 22 through the factory to freedom while workers cheer, then shoots him in the head outside. Rick J. 22 becomes the new Simple Rick, hooked up with his moment of false freedom playing on loop, and the theory suggests the factory deliberately orchestrated the entire rebellion to harvest this exact emotion. In The Ricklantis Mix-Up, Season 3, Episode 7, Rick J. 22 works at the Simple Rick's wafer cookie factory, stamping wafers on an assembly line. The episode opens with a commercial explaining Simple Rick sits hooked to machinery while his happiest memory plays on loop, filming his daughter Beth blow out birthday candles while saying, "I love Daddy." That emotional secretion gets extracted and flavors the cookies. So basically, they're selling cookies flavored with a father's love for his daughter, extracted without consent, which is somehow more dystopian than anything Black Mirror's done, but played for laughs, because cartoon. Rick J. 22's been doing this job for 15 years when his supervisor announces a promotion to regional manager, making the supervisor position available. Rick J. 22 looks hopeful, then learns the promotion goes to Cool Rick, some new guy who just arrived at the Citadel. Imagine working at the same McDonald's for 15 years, training every new manager, then watching them promote the teenager who started last week because he can do a kickflip. That's Rick J. 22's life. Later, Rick J. 22 watches a presidential debate where candidate Morty talks about factory workers getting paid a fraction of their boss's salary despite being identical with the same IQ. Rick J. 22 snaps, breaks off machinery as a weapon, enters his supervisor's office, and shoots him to death. Workplace violence is never the answer, but 15 years of stamping cookies while watching that memory loop probably doesn't do wonders for mental health. Rick J. 22 panics and runs to the flavor core chamber where Simple Rick is kept, locking it down with a force field. Rick J. 22 demands an unregistered portal gun to escape. The negotiator shows up with one, drops it through a miniature portal. Rick J. 22 grabs it, shuts down the Simple Rick machine, and tells the confused Simple Rick, "A bad place, but you're going to a better one soon." He fires a portal and pushes Simple Rick through. Simple Rick gets instantly blended in a geyser of blood. The negotiator screams about the blender dimension being the oldest trick in the book. Here's where the theory gets dark. The oldest trick in the book means this happens regularly. The factory has a protocol for worker rebellions involving hostages. Give them a blender dimension portal disguised as an escape route. They knew Rick J. 22 would use it to save Simple Rick, which eliminates the hostage situation and conveniently kills the current product right when they need a replacement. That's some Saw-level planning, except the trap is capitalism. Right after Simple Rick dies, factory owner Rick D. Sanchez III appears wearing a purple suit and top hat like Willy Wonka's evil twin. He tells the SWAT team to stand down, walks into the chamber, and asks Rick J. 22 how long he's worked there. 15 years. Rick D. Sanchez III declares, "What the hell have we become?" and leads Rick J. 22 down the assembly line, while all the workers cheer and celebrate. Commercial music plays. Rick J. 22 cries, tears of joy, walking past his co-workers, who are treating him like a hero, instead of the guy who just murdered their supervisor and took a hostage. Outside, Rick D. Sanchez III presents a fancy purple hover convertible and gives Rick J. 22 the keys. Right before Rick J. 22 reaches the car, Rick D. Sanchez III shoots him in the head. The scene reveals it was all being filmed. Cut to Rick J. 22 hooked into the Simple Rick machine with that walk down the assembly line playing on loop. New commercial. Come home to the unique flavor of shattering the grand illusion. Come home to Simple Rick. The theory suggests every element was orchestrated. The blender dimension portal wasn't a mistake. It was standard protocol. Rick D. Sanchez III's timing wasn't luck. He appeared immediately after Simple Rick died with a prepared speech. The workers' cheering wasn't spontaneous. They were told to perform. The fancy car wasn't a reward. It was a prop to maximize Rick J. 22's emotional response at the moment of I'm actually escaping. They're harvesting the specific emotion of believing you're free right before learning it was all staged. That's what goes into Freedom Wafer Selects. The narrator literally says, "We captured that taste, not captured a criminal, captured the taste of false liberation." Rick J., 22, experiences that moment on loop forever, walking through the factory, workers cheering, seeing the car, reaching for keys, believing he's escaping. The machinery extracts whatever chemicals that feeling produces. The darkest part? Simple Rick was probably a previous factory worker who had his own rebellion. Maybe his peak emotional moment was about love for his daughter, captured during his moment of believing he'd escape and see her again. That Rick served his term until Rick J. 22's rebellion provided a replacement. Now Rick J. 22 is Simple Rick, and he'll serve until the next worker snaps. The system is self-sustaining. Factory conditions are deliberately oppressive. MINSIF. 15 years with no promotion, watching newcomers get elevated, working for a fraction of the boss's salary. This creates resentment. The factory lets workers watch political debates that explicitly call out factory injustice, radicalizing them. When a worker snaps, the factory has a protocol. Give them the blender portal, let them kill the current. Simple Rick. Stage a freedom walk. Harvest them as the replacement. The factory didn't panic about losing Simple Rick. They had a replacement ready immediately. Rick J. 22 is already hooked up by the time the commercial airs. The factory didn't recover from the hostage crisis. They orchestrated it to generate new product. That's like if Amazon deliberately made warehouse conditions terrible specifically to harvest the desperation of workers trying to escape. Wait, don't give Jeff Bezos ideas. The commercial tagline, "Shattering the Grand Illusion," refers to Rick J. 22's rebellion mattering, being free, fighting the system, working. The factory shattered that illusion deliberately to create this flavor. They're selling cookies flavored with the moment a revolutionary realizes his rebellion was always part of the system, that his freedom was manufactured to extract maximum value before enslaving him forever. Original Simple Rick's situation seems terrible, forcing someone to experience their happiest memory on loop while harvesting brain chemicals. But at least that Rick achieved the moment naturally. Freedom Wafer. Rick had his moment manufactured entirely by his enslavers. Every element was designed to make him feel liberated right before destroying him. The walk, the cheers, the car, the keys, all props in a production where the finale is execution and eternal imprisonment. The factory perfected creating specific emotions through manipulation, then harvesting those emotions for profit. They're enslaving them emotionally by manufacturing hope, specifically to extract the chemicals hope produces when crushed. That's psychological torture as business model, which is somehow both the most Rick thing ever and the least Rick thing simultaneously. Other Ricks are buying cookies flavored with another Rick's false liberation. They're consuming his suffering, his shattered dreams, his moment of believing he was free before learning it was staged. And apparently, it tastes good enough to market successfully. The system requires a constant supply of rebellious workers, so the factory maintains conditions that create rebels while preventing actual successful rebellion. The oppression radicalizes workers, the protocol harvests them, and the cycle perpetuates infinitely. Rick J., 22, thought he was fighting the system. He was actually feeding it. The factory turned rebellion into a renewable resource, and every worker who thinks they're escaping just becomes the next product. That's the grand illusion, believing your resistance matters when you're just the next flavor. If you enjoyed our video today, subscribe to our channel for more videos like these.